watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 78 of the podcast, continuing in our Spielberg series. And we're kind of hitting the end of the 90s here. Last movie of the 90s was Saving Private Ryan. So, yeah, I'm excited. I have a returning guest. Melvin Benson is coming back on. He is the host of another film podcast called Cinematic Doctrine. But yeah, Melvin, it's great to have you back on.
Excited to be back. I had not watched this movie probably since the standard millennial hyperfixation of World War II that most people have during their like preteens to like early teens. And so it was really fun to revisit this after probably over a decade. And spoiler, still a good movie. So I'm excited to get into this. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. This was so one of the good things about doing these like director series is I get to fill in like blind spots along the way, and this is surprisingly was one of my Spielberg blind spots. I don't know why. I had never gotten around to seeing it, so I was excited to fill this blind spot in. Yeah, it is a good movie for sure.
Yes.
There's a reason Spielberg won Best Director for it. So Melvin, like I said, he has a podcast that I would definitely recommend. I enjoy popping on some episodes whenever I see a movie that I like. I'm like, oh, let's see what Melvin and his guest have to say about that. But yeah, Melvin, do you want to share a little bit for those who didn't catch the last episode that you were on, which was E.T., by the way? That was a good episode. Fill them in on what your podcast is all about and maybe some of your favorite like recent episodes that they should check out.
Sure thing. So, I am Melvin Benson from the Cinematic Doctrine podcast. I've been doing this podcast since about early 2019. So about 5 years of podcast episodes to check out. We roughly try to release about one episode a week. And then January is usually a hiatus, but otherwise, you're getting like 40 plus episodes every year. And we try to do a mix of modern movies as well as just generally like the classic quote unquote, I have a podcast, so I'm going to pick the movie that I want to talk about kind of discussion. Yes. I will say though, over the last year, we've primarily tried to pick a mix of like just generally interesting or generally popular movies as opposed to modern movies, just because I've been doing so many more guest appearances. So for instance, I had Eli on earlier this year to do Howl's Moving Castle. And that's not fun. A modern movie. And so we still got to discuss Miyazaki as a modern filmmaker. And so the last year in particular, it's a lot of movies from, I would say, generally the last 20 years, and then a few that were much further into the past. A couple episodes that I think have been particularly interesting. So just to go give a quick rundown of like the style. So we have movie discussions, which are probably like, I would say 30% less informative than the type of episode you guys do, because you will do very deep dives into the filmmaking, the general development of the film. We will do much more like, what is the film? And then express our thoughts through a series of 5 general questions that kind of help us to draw out discussions. Then we have party pleasers, which are more like, here's the movie from beginning to end, completely described. And then we add in commentary here and there. And so that's really good for more weird or eccentric movies or funny movies, even like bad. So bad. That's like the so bad it's good category that lets us watch movies that frankly I would like to talk about more often. And then we have the Let's Talk format, which is way more broad and far less frequent in terms of release schedule, but
Mhm.
it is one of the more interesting things I think we do, where we kind of pick a topic. We use movies to talk about the topic, but primarily discuss it. So the most recent episode for that was I had a musician, Kirsten St. John, who is the lead producer for a duo called Zoetic, and they came on to talk about like how they create CCM music and what is their ethics for Christian contemporary Christian music. And we then talked about two movies, The Jesus Music and Jesus Revolution, and then developed into modern CCM. So that's Let's Talks formats. And like over the last 4 or 5 years, we've done types of discussions through the Let's Talk format, but otherwise, primarily, you'll see movie discussions. And then in terms of ones I would recommend, I think our episode on the 1994 version of The Crow, I think turned out really great. I thought that was a really just excellent discussion on the film. In terms of your series on Spielberg, I thought Ready Player One turned out really good.
Yeah.
I had Sheila Gregoire from the Bare Marriage podcast come on to talk about The Assistant, a seriously underseen film.
Yes.
But that
Love
discussion
movie.
was very good. And that is a hard movie to watch.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear her thoughts on that, because I'm familiar with her content, and my wife loves her content too. So
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, she is so good. I was so happy to have her on. I actually like really tried to get her on like throughout the whole year, but I kept having like literal technical issues. For some reason, when sending Outlook emails to a Gmail email, for some reason, it would not like verify my Outlook email as a real email. So I kept having issues. And then at some point I gave up and just made a new Gmail email for the podcast and then just like contacted them. Anyway, so that turned out good. And then I would say like, in terms of like general interesting episodes, we had one at the beginning of the year on Animal Farm, the 1954 version. So very soon after the publication of the book. And it just to tease a little bit of what makes that so interesting is that animated rendition of the film is a CIA developed film.
Interesting.
So I'll leave it at that. Tune into the episode. You'll hear some very interesting things about how the CIA used that to target it's pre-Russia. What's it called? The Soviet Union.
Yeah.
But I digress. We do all kinds of things on the podcast. It's very fun. And it's been, I think you said you were a longtime listener, which I've really appreciated. I'm glad you enjoy the show.
Yeah. I wish I was able to listen more often. But I do try to catch like, especially like if I've seen one of the movies you're covering, I'll try to like throw that in the queue, to hear the thoughts. So yeah, it's a great podcast. I definitely recommend it. It's and you have my podcast is like not religious focused. It's just like general talk about the film and its themes and stuff. Melvin's does a lot of the same, really. So like you don't have to be like a Christian or religious to listen. The discussion is very engaging. But y'all do get a little bit deeper into that stuff sometimes. So if that's something you're interested in, and how like film relates to like faith and all of that, then yeah, definitely check out Cinematic Doctrine. But yeah, I was joking with Melvin before we started recording that I'm gonna steal all of his ideas from his Ready Player One episode whenever I get ready to record that episode. But yeah,
feel free to steal from Frank too. His thoughts were very good in the film too. That was the guest I had, and he he was just a really great guest. He had good stuff. So yeah, if you guys want a good addition, maybe a jump ahead, so to speak, on the Spielberg series, check out the Cinematic Doctrine Ready Player One series episode we had. It's pretty fun.
I remember too, a while back you had sent me like it was like a post or an article or something about 1941, the Spielberg movie. I don't know if you remember that.
I'm trying to remember.
You sent me I'm gonna scroll back in our messages. But yeah,
you the same.
It was a letterbox review you sent me of a review from a guy named Justin DeClow.
Oh yes, Justin DeClow. Yeah,
DeClow.
He's a really good podcaster and film discussion guy.
But yeah, 1941. That might be an interesting party pleaser episode. It's definitely a bad movie that is fun to talk about how bad it is. So, um,
Keep watching that inbox, Eli. I might be reaching out soon.
oh man. But yeah, I don't know that I would want to watch it again. That's the only thing I'm like, but yeah,
That bad. Ooh, that's brutal.
it's
I haven't seen it.
it's just, it's that bad. It's Spielberg, so it's like, man, I expected so much more. It's the standard goes up when you're an all-time great director. It's like,
Ooh, yeah.
you get counted off more if your movie is not up to par to your normal.
And I haven't watched. I own a copy of Duel, and because I haven't watched
Duel
it yet,
is
I haven't
good.
I haven't listened to your episode, so it's good. Okay,
It is
yeah.
good. It is.
Because I know his early movies are consistently good, except for
Yeah.
1941.
So he had like 3 TV movies, and then he had a bunch of like episodes, like not a bunch, but he had like a good handful of like TV episodes that he directed, and then TV movies. But Duel is the one that got him out of TV and able to start in like making films.
Yeah.
Like he did. It was a TV movie. It did like it actually did a theatrical tour in Europe.
That sounds
And
about right. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure Truffaut, or somebody like that, like went to his hotel and like wanted to like congratulate him because it was really good. It's like that's, but yeah, Duel is really really good. It's not like top tier Spielberg or anything, but it's like, man, this dude made this movie like as his basically his first feature film. It's like, it's one of those like, man, this guy is going to make some good movies kind of thing. But it's basically Jaws with a big semi truck.
All right, you sold me. That sounds awesome. Oh man, yeah. When you're talking about like TV movies and to like, oh, this guy has a good career, the first thing I thought was John Carpenter with Someone's Watching Me.
Okay.
He made that movie that it released the same year, and I think like 2 months either before or after Halloween. And it's really well made. It's super thrilling. It's complicated in terms of like what it wants to explore. There's a couple things that like later on in his career he would like improve on in terms of thrillingness. But like as a TV movie, you're like, oh, this guy's going to be transitioning out of TV very soon.
Yeah.
Because it's so impressive.
Yeah.
So it's cool to hear about like more directors being the same way. That like, yeah, they
whenever
just
you watch Duel, whenever we watch Duel, hit me up and let me know what you think. Because
absolutely,
yeah,
oh my gosh, yeah, I'm super interested in it. I love that era of like cars are scary. There's a Stephen King one. I forget what it's called.
Oh,
I think Emilio Estevez is in it.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't remember what it's called.
I remember seeing it on TV as like a really young kid and being like, that's the coolest, most adult movie I've ever seen in my life. So I've always wanted to go back and watch it again. So
Duel is like a masterclass in like tension building and tension holding, which is something that you kind of see throughout Spielberg's career, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit in this movie for sure.
Oh yes.
So yeah, and so I'm going to use that to segue us into talking about this movie, which is Saving Private Ryan, and we're going to go all the way back to the beginning as we usually do with Robert Rodat, which I'm assuming that's how you say his name. I watched like the making of docs that he was in. I think that's how they said it. Anyway, so around the 50th anniversary of D-Day, he was visiting a war memorial in his small town in New Hampshire and noticed that there were these recurring last names of fallen soldiers at this war memorial. There was like 3 lost during the Revolutionary War and 5 during the Civil War. They all had the same last name. They were all from this town, New Hampshire. And it got him thinking about, families losing, a bunch of their family members in the war. And then he got a hold of one of Stephen E. Ambrose's books, which many people may recognize Ambrose, his name, because he wrote the book that inspired Band of Brothers,
Mm-hmm.
the HBO series that Spielberg and Tom Hanks produced together. And Ambrose is a really well-known like World War II expert and has a bunch of books on World War II. So, but yeah, he was reading one of his books about D-Day and ran across this story about the Neeland family. The Neelands had their story is basically like the inspiration for the story that we see in the movie. So there was 4 sons and 3 of them died, or like reportedly died, and they tried to extract the 4th brother, and yeah, I think the real history is that they later found out that one of them hadn't died. It was like falsely reported, and that sort of thing. But it's the idea of that inspired it. And then he was kind of reading too about the reason brothers ended up getting split up in the war in the first place, which was this 1942 warship early in the war where 5 brothers were on this warship and it sank and they all died. And
Jeez.
yeah, and it sparked this kind of unwritten military rule where brothers could not serve like in the same companies and on the same ship, all that sort of thing. So that's what makes the kind of Neeland family story, which happened later in the war, even more like heartbreaking. Is they're splitting up the brothers, but they still all died within days of each other.
Yeah.
Or at least reportedly, except for the one. And so he starts kind of developing the idea for this story off of those. He pitches it to Mark Gordon, who is a producer, and yeah, Gordon commissions a script from him, starts talking to Paramount about it. They are interested, but weeks later they acquire some scripts about World War II. One is like a Bruce Willis medium called Combat. One is written for Arnold Schwarzenegger called With Wings as Eagles. I don't know if those movies ever happened because I've never heard of them. But he kind of gets nervous. Gordon's getting nervous. He brings on this guy, Gary Levinson, as another producer. And they're in talks with Karen Sage, who's an agent that's connected with both Spielberg and Tom Hanks. And she kind of reassures him and arranges for Hanks and Spielberg to look at the script. Well, they both... So Spielberg and Tom Hanks are really good friends at this point. They've never worked together. They tried to... At one point, Spielberg was supposed to direct Big, which is based on... I'm pretty sure Big was based on a script that one of his sisters had written. And so Spielberg was originally going to direct Big with Tom Hanks, but didn't end up doing that. But at this point, they're really good friends. But they like kind of separately catch wind of this project through this agent. And so kind of separately, Gordon meets with Tom Hanks and Levinson, and Hanks is like very passionate about World War II and loved the story. He hears that Spielberg might be attached, and he kind of gets excited about working possibly with Spielberg. Spielberg gets the script, and he's like very like drawn in. Spielberg also really loves World War II, which we'll get into, and is drawn by like these moral kind of questions that are in this story of like sacrifice and civilized men being turned barbaric and all these sorts of moral questions. And I was actually thinking about it, and there, apart from 1941, which is really not a war movie, it's really a comedy kind of set around the like war. He really hasn't made a war movie before this or since this. They're all like war adjacent movies.
Yes.
So it's like, Schindler's List and The Bridge of Spies and Lincoln and Empire of the Sun. They're all these movies that are kind of like adjacent to war, but not like quote unquote war movies.
Which
Which
even
is
kind of
interesting.
feels present with Saving Private Ryan in that like it has great action, like
Mhm.
very clearly, because the first 40 minutes are amazing, terrifying action sequences, and the last 40 minutes the same thing.
Mhm.
But like most of the drama is how the action impacts the players. And like that seems to be more of what's compelling to him.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he would make a World War II themed Marvel film where like it would just be action. And like
Yeah.
that is 100% not Spielberg's interest at all.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what benefits the film is that he like the rest of his filmography proves that he's less interested in the excitement, the surface level excitement of the action, and more about like how does this disruptive, extravagant moment affect these people. And then he also has a penchant for brilliant, thrilling moments, and that makes the film all the more better.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really is that like human element, that story, like that human story aspect that kind of drew him in the first place. And which is why probably most of his other ones are like war adjacent, because it's easier to kind of like stay out of the weeds of like the war itself and just like dig into these characters, these people and their stories. And so so like I said, he was very drawn to World War II. He saw it. I wrote down this quote. He said, "Quote: World War II was the crossroads of the 20th century. Its consequences still affect us today and will still crucially affect the coming millennium." Unquote. And so, like, he saw World War II as very important. His dad, Arnold Spielberg, served in Burma on the Indian front in the Air Force. He was a radio operator on bombers in World War II, and so he kind of grew up hearing those stories from his dad about that, and his dad brought back like stuff from Burma that I would imagine he probably has at this point as kind of like heirlooms. But yeah, so he was always fascinated with it, and in fact, when he started getting into film, if you've listened to the whole series, you might remember early on me talking about when he was a kid, he made some movies, and two of those movies were World War II movies that he made when he was around 13 to 14 years old. One was called Escape to Nowhere, and it's basically him and his like Boy Scout troop all got together on a weekend and went out into the desert in Arizona and made this war battle film. It's like, I don't remember how long it is. It's probably like 30-ish minutes long, 30 to 40 minutes maybe. And it's really like you can see clips of it. You can catch clips of it on like YouTube and stuff. And it's really kind of cool because these kids and Spielberg's dad who kind of helped him put it together really were inventive. So they didn't obviously have like a budget for special effects, but they were like figuring out ways to show like, oh, grenades hit, and so they would like set up these planks on top of a rock like a seesaw and have like a bunch of dirt and mud on one end of it, and so when they were running, they would like step on the other end, it would throw up the dust, and then they would throw themselves forward like they had just gotten hit with
That's
a
great.
grenade or something. So like super inventive as like 13, 14-year-olds. The other one was called Fighter Squad, and it was like a kind of an Air Force thing. So his dad was able to get them on some like World War II planes so they could shoot in the cockpit. And Spielberg was like in actually one of the making of things on the Blu-ray for Saving Private Ryan, his dad is talking about how like, yeah, so like when the plane was supposed to be banking, he would like Stephen would like turn the camera to make it to give the effect like that the airplane was banking and stuff, and then he went and found this like black and white archive real footage from like I don't remember where he found it. It was somewhere in town at a shop. He found this World War II footage on reels, and he took that and like edited splices of like actual World War II archive footage into his little film. So, you know, it would have like in the cockpit, it's its friend acting, you know, as the pilot. And then it cuts to like an actual like World War II footage, you know, really like inventive stuff. Yeah. I'm just like, man, I wish I was making stuff like that when I was 13 years old, you know?
Funny.
But yeah, so what's interesting though, coming off of that, so in 1964, his parents got divorced. He thought it was because of the kind of neglect of his dad. And then later found out his dad kind of like took on the blame, but he later found out that his mom actually had kind of fallen in love with his dad's best friend. And so all along he's harboring this bitterness against his dad when really it was his mom that kind of like sparked the divorce in the first place. So he had started reconciling with his dad in the mid 80s. And so at this point he's like loving his dad again, you know? And so he had kind of dedicated Schindler's List to his mom. And so this was like the movie that he dedicated to his dad. So there's a lot around this film that makes it very important for Spielberg in his life, you know? It kind of like, in a way, this like solidifies him being reconciled with his dad, that father-son relationship. Like, okay, this movie is like for my dad and all the other World War II vets too, but like personally for him, it was for his dad. So I thought that was really cool and really sweet, you know. And so all that to kind of say it wasn't hard for Spielberg to say yes to to this movie.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. But yeah, so he gets DreamWorks in. You know, DreamWorks is his fresh new studio still at this point, and they kind of deal with the casting in the US. Paramount is gets on board too. They do the casting abroad. And yeah, he starts jumping into the script. They do some reworks of the script from Rodat's work. Hanks does a little bit of help with him, and then Frank Darabont, who was uncredited, actually did a bunch of reworking of the script with him. And Darabont, if you're unfamiliar, is Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, writer and director of those. So pretty good screenwriter, I would say.
Oh yes, yeah. Even like as late as like season 1 Walking Dead, like this guy, consistently putting out like just excellent work. So yeah, that's like a dream team working on this script.
Oh yeah. So he's not credited, but definitely does some important stuff. Like they really work to accentuate kind of the documentarian feel of some of the parts. So like in the original script, there was kind of like jokes that were exchanged in that opening D-Day scene between people that was kind of typical of the films that were coming out at that time. And so they like remove all of like the jokes,
Good
all
choice.
of like, anything that takes away from like the horror and the chaos of the moment. They kind of remove all that stuff. And I know Darabont too kind of did some work on the is it Jackson? Private Jackson, I think, is the sniper. I'm pretty sure that's the guy. Anyway, the Barry Pepper character, Jackson. He kind of like all the religious stuff. From what I've heard, I wasn't able to like completely verify this, but I did hear that he kind of added in like so like when he's like reciting scripture, like that religious stuff is like Darabont did that stuff.
Good choice, because like
makes sense, you know.
It's that like little quirk that like okay, so you're stripping out the comedy. Fair, because you want this film to be digestible, authentic, and you really want to like orient your point and your thesis with such integrity that you don't want to like break it down. But you have to find a way to still at least make things like cool isn't really the right word, but like engaging. And so to have this sniper character be and here's where cool is the right word, cool, like the fact that he recites scripture or like recites at least some sort of spirituality and then like does some awesome stuff throughout the movie, like that at least brings not levity but like at least a I would almost say like a reinforcement of confidence throughout the film. Because like it is such a debilitating feature, it is such a exhausting movie that like you do kind of have to have some set of character or characters that have something at least a little more just like defined other than just sad characters suffering through World War II. And it's a great choice for him, because I know like people ostensibly like when you talk about this film are like, yeah, what about that sniper guy? Like it's like the one guy that everyone's like, oh, he's so cool. Like, so and great addition.
And I think too, like Spielberg is really, and we'll probably talk about this later, but like he's really good at like he kind of falls short in some of his films, but in a lot of his films he's very, very efficient with building a character and getting you to say, okay, this is what this guy is and this is what he's about. And so, you know, and he works with his writers obviously to do that. He's involved. He's always involved in the script. He's never just like taking a script and leaving it as is. He's always like very involved with it. And he really needs someone to write it for him to kind of take all of his ideas and like parse them out. It's something that he's done a couple of good screenplays, but I think his best movies are movies where someone has written for him. So, but yeah, so, you know, going off of that, he kind of like, they're really watching a lot of World War II films, documentary and fictional, both. They're watching testimonial accounts. He has a good friend, Samuel Fuller, who we met on the 1941 set, actually, who was a vet that lived through Omaha and had actually made a film in 1980 about it called The Big Red One. So Fuller kind of like gave him a lot of advice about the, you know, D-Day and that sort of thing. The fear that he felt in that moment and like the noise and sound of it all are like some of the things that Fuller emphasized, and that that kind of comes across like in the movie. For sure.
Yes, it does.
But yeah, another major influence were photos taken by Robert Capra on D-Day morning. And so, so in the first minutes of landing, this guy Capra was on the scene with a camera taking photos. There are these like heat of the moment photos. They're often pretty blurry. I've looked at a few of them. There actually like were a bunch that were destroyed in a lab accident when they were being developed. And so there would have been like 300 of these photos, but I think now there's only like a handful of them that survived. And so it really like, I think this is like the main thing that convinced him, okay, these are what the photos look like of that day. And so that, along with like all the newsreel footage that was captured in World War II, really inspired the whole handheld camera, chaotic filming that are in those battle sequences. But yeah, those pictures are really interesting. You can probably just search Robert Capra D-Day pictures and look at a handful of them. But yeah, another thing that I thought was interesting was that Spielberg talked about watching war films from like that he loved when he was younger, not to pull from them, but to kind of distance this movie from those movies.
Smart.
Yeah, because the World War II movies he grew up loving were very like, let's make these people as honorable as we can. Let's like make this more glorious and more, that sort of thing. And he was going for the opposite of that in many ways. And so he wasn't wanting to glorify the war. He wasn't wanting to just like make basically like, a superhero movie with military men as the superheroes. He was wanting to get into the nitty gritty. So he actually watched these films to kind of like distance himself from those a bit, which I thought was interesting. And yeah, the other like crazy thing about this movie is he's really like jumping into this after I mean, he is on a movie spree. And so so he actually was like looking to do this after The Lost World, Jurassic Park. And then Amistad seemed like it was years away still. He was looking to produce that. And then he gets the script for Amistad. And the script is like really great. He loves the script. And so he's like, I think I might want to make this kind of on a whim. Like, I think I'll make this movie. And if you go back to the Amistad episode, I have a lot to say about that. I don't think it was the best choice for him to direct that movie. But I already did my rant on that in that episode. It was a solo episode, which was good because I was able to go on a rant. I don't often rant on this podcast, but I had one for that. It was good to get it off my chest. But yeah, so I mean,
I get that.
he has a 4-week break after The Lost World before he starts shooting Amistad, and then he finishes Amistad and has a 6-week break before he starts filming this movie. So he's really moving.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah. There's a reason why this movie came out in 1998 and his next movie doesn't come out till 2001. So he needed a break.
Yeah, he's like, I did it. I won. I'm going to take a break.
Exactly.
I succeeded.
It's kind of a trend. So this is like, he has like this burst of 3 movies. He has a break. Then he has like another burst of 3 movies and a break. And then another burst of like, he kind of makes that a trend for a while, for like a good like 2 decades. Let's talk about the crew that he assembled. So Spielberg produced with, as I said, Mark Gordon and Gary Levinson, and Ian Bryce was another producer. We already mentioned Robert Rodat wrote the screenplay. He has Janusz Kaminski coming back. This is their 4th film now together, as the cinematographer or the director of photography, whatever you want to call that guy. I don't know what more people say. Like, what's the more common thing? Do people say cinematographer or director of photography more?
I
think
like
director of photography is like what comes up in the credits, like when the credits roll.
Yes.
So yeah, that's probably the better.
I do think I've heard like more commonly cinematographer, but director of photography I think is the appropriate term.
Yeah. He has some camera operators that were listed in my source material. That I figured I would shout out because there is a lot of camera work, in this movie. That's important. Seamus Corcoran, I guess. Corcoran? I don't know. Which, by the way, I was laughing recently about the name Seamus because my wife didn't think it was a real name. And then she realized, oh, that's how you pronounce that name.
Not Seamus?
Yeah, not Seamus. It's Seamus. And so I thought that was funny. Not to call out my wife behind her back, but we laughed about it together. So
the song "Seamus" by Pink Floyd is often considered the worst Pink Floyd song ever written. And so
Yeah.
that's why I'm familiar with the name
That's funny.
Seamus. And yes, that song is not very good. That album, okay, but that
Yeah.
song, not very good.
That's funny. I don't actually know how to say this next guy's name. Is it Cian or Chien or Cian? I'm going to say Cian de Boutelier.
Huh.
We're going to roll with that.
Got it.
Mitch Dubin and Chris Harhoff are the other two camera operators. Yeah, definitely a lot of guys running around with cameras that deserve shout outs.
I'll say. Yeah.
Sergio Mimica Gazan is the assistant director. You don't hear assistant directors a lot, but this guy has been with Spielberg for like a good handful of movies now. And so he obviously is a big help for Spielberg. You never see him in the making of stuff either. I don't even know what this guy looks like.
Interesting.
But he's been on, his name pops up in a lot of Spielberg movies as the assistant director. But yeah, Michael Kahn doing the editing, of course, and John Williams doing the score for the movie, of course. Those are no brainers. Anyone that's been listening to this series could have told you that probably, that those were going to be the guys. And he has some returning sound guys too. Andy Nelson has worked with him before. Ron Judkins is a staple. Gary Rydstrom is a staple for him for sound at this point, and then Gary Summers as well. Which these guys are huge shout out to these guys, because the sound in this movie is maybe one of the best things about the movie. So,
it's amazing.
Yeah,
I would love to rewatch this movie with headphones to even just see where they place the sounds.
Mm-hmm.
I watch it with on my television with the speakers I have, but even that sounded just so impressive. And years ago I watched Band of Brothers and even that sounds great. I don't know how involved they were with that, or if at all, but it carries over similar kind of focus on just how deafening and just almost hypnotic the sounds become.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And even just from the start of the film, there are points where you kind of just are so drawn into the fact that part of the exhaustion of the violence of the film is you just have to pick out one or two words and then hope you heard the correct thing, and then do that thing to try to defeat your enemy. And that really adds to the material. Plus, it's typical for Spielberg to have characters talk over each other all the time. So you're adding that on top of his interests as a filmmaker, and you're just it might as well be a silent film because I don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so it's these guys put in the work. It's impressive.
Yeah. The sound is so impressive. And the production design is really good too. Thomas E. Sanders.
Oh yeah.
Production designer, and set decoration by Lisa Dean. Shout out to those guys. The makeup done by Lois Burrell, Connor O'Sullivan, and Daniel C. Stripke. Neil Corbold does the special effects. He's worked with Spielberg before as well. Gotta shout out stunt coordinator Simon Crane. You can't have a movie like this without a really good stunt coordinator. And he pops up in some of the making of little shorts. So fun. It's always fun to hear from the stunt coordinators on those. You can tell they just really are having a good time usually. But hard work. It's hard work too. So but last few casting by Denise Chamian and Stephen E. Ambrose that we've mentioned was the history consultant, and Dell Dye, who we'll get into in just a bit, was the military consultant. And so that's the crew. The cast is a very interesting cast, I think. Tom Hanks obviously comes on as Captain Miller. He was in it from the beginning, really. They did consider Harrison Ford and Mel Gibson for the role as well. That at least that's what I read somewhere. So there's always rumors of alternate castings that it's hard to like nail down if they actually. Sometimes they'll like talk about it in like the making of docs, and so you're like, oh, that's a real one because Spielberg said he wanted this guy and he refused the part. But this one, I couldn't really find that, so maybe those guys actually work, but who knows? But what's interesting about Tom Hanks that I thought I would mention is this dude is on like a like all-time like Hollywood star run. He makes this is right in the middle of it. So I'm just going to list these out because this is just going to show you how incredibly impressive this run is. So he's got A League of Their Own in 1992, Sleepless in Seattle 93, Philadelphia 93, Forrest Gump 94, Apollo 13 95, Toy Story 95. He's got this movie in 98. Then You've Got Mel in 98, Toy Story 2 99, The Green Mile 99, Castaway 2000, Road to Perdition 02. Like crazy run. And then it all caps off with Catch Me If You Can in 2002. He basically has a run of, so the only movie that was a flop in the middle of all that was That Thing You Do in 96. Which if you haven't heard of that movie, it's probably because not many people have, because it was a big flop, I guess. So basically he has 13 in that run. 13 of his 14 movies are $100 million domestic box office movies. That's insane.
It really asserts like having you compile this here really brings clarity to like the just absolute fascination with Tom Hanks as an actor, because that is a crazy decade of films.
It's a decade of dominance as a movie star.
It is like just to bring up Marvel again, like you have like these IP characters coming back every couple of movies, but here's like one actor coming back every couple months to like come in and just like do a new performance, and they're consistently successful. Like Forrest Gump is a banger. Apollo 13, great. Toy Story, super good. Toy Story 2, really great. Green Mile, so on and so forth. And like this guy just like his agent and his own work just consistently bringing out like success one after another. And like half of the reason people check out these movies has been like, oh yeah, he's also Hanks in it. And so like it's like what a decade, right? Like that's amazing.
it really is. And all of them being like $100 million domestic, not just worldwide, but like just domestically breaking $100 million or more is like so big. 13 of 14 movies in one decade. That's crazy. The movie he does after Catch Me If You Can was The Lady Killers by the Coen brothers, which is, I've never seen it. It's one of my Coen blind spots, but apparently is it's considered one of their worst films. Brutal. So it's unfortunate that the one Coen brothers movie Tom Hanks joins is considered like one of their worst.
Maybe he should have joined in with the Wes Anderson crew.
He did.
The Coen crew.
He did.
Because I can't remember.
He was in Asteroid City.
Okay, good. Yes,
he's actually like surprisingly fits into that movie really well.
He looks like he ought to be throughout Wes Anderson's legacy. So hopefully he sticks around and is in a couple of new ones.
I would love to see him in another Anderson movie. That would be great. He plays the dad of my mind is blank, of the main character.
I'm misremembering the actor's name too.
Jason.
I know who you're talking about. Schwartzman.
Jason Schwartzman.
Yeah.
He plays his dad in Asteroid City. Really well. It's impressive run by Tom Hanks. And this is like right dead in the center of it. I don't know, just crazy.
Yes.
And it kind of culminates with Catch Me If You Can, which we'll get to eventually. So, not their last collaboration though. They keep collaborating on and off for a few movies. So, yes. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is in the making of, Spielberg and Hanks talked about how they had kind of been avoiding making movies together because they were really good friends, and didn't want to like ruin their friendship for making like by working together, which is which is strange because like neither Spielberg or Tom Hanks seemed like the kind of guy that you would like that would easily like just start hating each other just because they work together, even if it was a bad. They just seem both like genuinely like pretty easygoing, nice guys. So I'm like, I don't know. That's it just doesn't match like what their like persona feels like to me. But
I wonder if like their work ethic is so serious
maybe
that like when they're on set and then when they're like working on a project together, there's worry of like just sort of like steamrolling. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear about their consistent work moving like forward and to see like how they approached their relationship while working together. Because very clearly, like outside of it, they have a relationship.
I mean, when you see like Spielberg on set in the making of stuff, like he's always like very pleasant. Like he gets like in a focus mode where he's like, here's what we're doing, let's go, or whatever. But it's never like mean or rude. But also like, I don't think you would put that on a making of documentary if it was there. So
gosh, I would love it. Like just that honesty would be so fascinating. I don't know. I guess that would probably be for like Fan Four Stick with Josh Trank, but like that would be like also really embarrassing to watch. But I digress.
But I mean, so on this movie, they were both so excited about it that they just were like, screw it, we'll do it. We're going to work on this together. And then Spielberg too talked about how Hanks really fit his vision for these characters, which were quote unquote faces of ordinary Americans. Kind of the antithesis of like muscular action heroes that you would see in war movies sometimes. And I think Hanks does fit that mold, as well as like pretty much all the other guys, all the other cast members fit that mold of like faces of ordinary Americans.
The only one that like comes out of it not fitting that mold in terms of their career is Vin Diesel. And even then, during this era, like he still fits that mold.
He does,
and so it's such clever casting to be like, I want to purposely make these people be grounded to reality. And then that, of course, runs narratively because, you know, the whole intent is like, these are just normal people who were then like either a mix of volunteers or drafted into this awful event. So that's good stuff.
And really the only other guy that was like pretty well known at this point would have been Tom Sizemore. Originally Billy Bob Thornton was asked to play Sergeant Horvath, which if you're trying to like place character names, Horvath was like Miller's kind of right-hand man through the movie in the crew. So Billy Bob Thornton refused. They asked Sizemore to play the role, and Sizemore he had been on a little run of like pretty good roles. He was in True Romance and Natural Born Killers. He was coming off of Heat with Michael Mann. You know, the action is the juice. Is like a line that I love that Sizemore says in that movie, which I caught up with for the first time earlier this year. I had another one that I was like, man, I really need to see Heat. Have you ever seen Heat?
I haven't. I've also heard like in terms of an action movie, it's like peak.
It is really incredible. I've been doing a little bit of like Michael Mann blind spotting over the past year. Every once in a while, I'll be like, all right, what Michael Mann movie have I seen? Not seen. So.
And I know you're literally about to read it, but your next note about Thin Red Line, like I also was like reminded that like, oh yeah, same year and same Oscar nom during Saving Private Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been nice to have watched it by now, but it still continues to sit on my shelf in preparation for watching it. Thank you, Thrift Store, for having a copy.
So he, like you were mentioning, Sizemore turned down the role that was offered to him by Terrence Malick in The Thin Red Line to take on this role, which honestly, like as a career move, is the right choice. Like,
yes. Oh yeah.
Take the Spielberg movie over the Malick movie, because you don't know when the Malick movie is ever going to come out.
Yep.
And you don't know if he's going to cut all of your scenes. Malick is one of my favorite directors, just like all time. I think Malick is a genius, but like, if I was an actor, I would not. I would be like, you know what, Malick, love you. I'm gonna watch your movie, but I'm gonna take the Spielberg role.
Or like pay me up front. And guarantee that I get to work on your next Malick movie. So I still have work. Oh my gosh, like his next movie being like a poetic depiction of like stories of the gospel, and it's like I half expect him to just cut Jesus out of it, at this point, because he just cuts whatever he wants and puts in whatever he wants, and he just becomes so transfixed in the visuals because he's like, oh, it's beautiful.
This movie is supposed to be coming out for a while now. But
yes, like I think Hidden Life was 2019, 2018, and like he was already like halfway working into like that film. So
still in post-production.
Boy, he just is like, people support me, whatever, I'll work whenever I want.
I mean, props. Like I said, he's made some of my favorite movies of all time. So
he has earned the right to take his time.
And The Thin Red Line, great movie, phenomenal. I would say it's like up there with this one. It's like as far as like best war movies, easily. So, same year, crazy,
nuts.
And this is another very interesting thing about Sizemore. Sizemore apparently had a big drug problem at this time, and the rumor is that Spielberg told him that he had to do drug tests every day. I have a very unfortunate typo that I'm not going to read.
Oh, it's funny. I was going to make a joke, but you mentioned it first.
I have. I'll let your imagination figure out what my typo says. But he did drug tests every day, and if he failed, apparently Spielberg told him if he failed, even on the very last day of shooting, he would reshoot his entire role. So it seems like Sizemore passed all his drug tests because he's in the movie. So,
and he's good. He's a genuinely good addition to the film.
He is. He is. He's a good kind of counterpart to Hanks's character, I think. In that they're like opposite, but just more of like the chemistry of them kind of bouncing off of each other works really well. Moving on through the cast, the rest of these guys are really like not super well known at this point. So Edward Burns plays Private Reiben. He's kind of like he might just be from Brooklyn. This character. I don't know why else he would have it plastered on the back of his uniform in big letters, but I have a hunch that character is supposed to be from Brooklyn. But Edward Burns is not. Edward Burns is a Boston guy, and he actually at this point was kind of like a not super well known indie writer director. He had done a first feature called The Brothers McMullen in '95, where he played the lead role, and that's actually where Spielberg saw him and thought he would like play this like strong New Yorker really well. One of the things that Spielberg said in the making of about him that I thought was, thinking back was like, oh, that's so true, is that he could get a laugh without milking the cow, meaning like he kind of like would say these kind of offhand lines that were funny, but he's not like with his
Mm-hmm.
little jokes. He
Yeah.
just like says it and moves on, and you chuckle. And Spielberg really liked that about him as an actor. So
Yeah, super charismatic.
mhm. Vin Diesel plays Private Caparzo, an unknown at the time. He had written and directed a feature called Strays in '97. So these two guys, Burns and Diesel, both were like they both were interested in like writing and directing alongside acting. So Spielberg, I don't know if he had seen Strays, but he definitely cast him off of a short that Diesel had directed and starred in called Multifacial. And so I have not seen that, so don't know what drew him to to Diesel in that. But yeah, so Diesel joins very smartly joins the team.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, when you see what's cool is when you see Diesel in the making of stuff, he is all the other actors, the other actors are talking about Spielberg and what he did and stuff, and they're talking about how they got into their parts. Diesel is just like, this is what Spielberg did really well as a director. You can tell he's like in the mindset of like he's a director, and so like he's like thinking
Mm-hmm.
about like what can I draw from Spielberg as a director for my own work, which is cool, these next four guys are all like very beginning of their acting careers. So you have Barry Pepper as Private Jackson, the sniper, Adam Goldberg as Private Mellish, aka Fish, Giovanni Ribisi as the medic Wade, and Jeremy Davies as Corporal Upham, who is the cowardly translator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so those four guys are really like at the beginning of their careers. They're just guys that I guess like came through auditions. Spielberg liked their faces and liked their feel and brought them on board. And the only one that I had really a note on was Spielberg talked about how Jeremy Davies like really brought a ton to the character that wasn't on the page. And he was just talking about how much he appreciated that character and what Davies brought to that character. So that was cool to hear. And then of course you have Matt Damon as Private Ryan.
Yes.
This is where the quest for anonymous faces kind of went wrong. Obviously you have Hanks, who's a big star, so it's not like the movie was devoid of big stars, but you do have to have one big star. He was not going for that with Damon, and actually like this character, if you think about it, it should be the most anonymous face of them all.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
But unfortunately, Good Will Hunting came out between the shooting of Saving Private Ryan and the release of Saving Private Ryan. So by the time it comes out, Damon is already pretty famous from that movie. And
on like multiple levels.
Yeah,
even.
As a writer with Affleck, they got nominated for the screenplay, so he's like there at the Oscars. He's become the face that you were hoping he wouldn't be by the time this movie releases.
Yeah, and I can totally understand Spielberg's reticence to having like a known face, because like part of the ethic and the question of the film is like, earn this. Have you earned the right of being protected, of being saved, of being sacrificed for?
Yeah, is
and
this
like,
guy worth it?
Right, and that has to be like to the layman, not to the Oscar-winning actor who wrote a script that ended up like just like exploding his career alongside his best friend. And so I can totally understand the like directorial pursuit of casting someone who's a no name, getting Matt Damon, and then like this guy blows up and you're like, poured another glass of whiskey. No, dang it, like it didn't work out. Like, and in the end, the film, the whole
it still works. Yeah,
exactly. And it's benefited by Damon also being a great actor, that like it carries into like he transforms into a nobody, so to speak. And that's what good acting has to be.
Yeah.
But it is extremely funny that that's how it turned out.
Yeah. And of course he was introduced to Spielberg by Robin Williams. So, I blame it on Robin Williams for not saying like, hey, I know you want this anonymous guy for this role. Here's this guy I was just in his movie and it's really great. So
yeah, right.
you should have told him, should have warned him that this movie was about to blow up, It
was a joke. Like that was one of his really meta jokes.
Yeah.
Spielberg. I don't know.
But yeah, Damon does a good job. He talked about how like he read a bunch of World War II stuff and kind of tracked down some veterans and talked to them about he was just talking about he has no experience in this, like he doesn't know anything, so he can't really like draw from his own experience for the character, and really sought out that kind of testimonial experience for the part. Cool to hear. I'm gonna run through the rest of these. You do have a couple more like big names in Ted Danson and Paul Giamatti, who play Captain Hamill and Sergeant Hill. Not really much to say about those guys. They're fine. They're good in their parts.
They're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I especially liked Giamatti's clumsiness in that one scene where he like breaks the wall and there's all the Germans.
Yep, great scene.
I love that.
Good.
But yeah, the rest of these guys, just to run through the rest of the like kind of major players, there's obviously like a ton more cast than this. But you have Dennis Farina as Lieutenant Colonel Anderson. You have Jörg Stadler as Steamboat Willie, who you probably don't know who that is. So I will tell you, that is the German that they let go, which he talks about Steamboat Willie. So that's, I guess, why they named the character that. You have Max Martini as Corporal Henderson, comes into play. Nathan Fillion plays in the I love that in the he's called Minnesota Ryan, so he's the fake Private Ryan, is what I called him. But I didn't realize this. I didn't recognize him, but he plays the lead role in Firefly. He's that guy.
Yes.
Which it did not click with me while I was watching the movie.
It is interesting how much younger he looks.
Yes,
even though it's 98, like it's not that earlier.
It isn't.
Firefly.
Yeah. But yeah. So Harv Presnell plays General Marshall. He is the guy that reads out like the Lincoln letter to two guys, and Bryan Cranston, who plays War Department Colonel. If you I don't know if you recognized younger Bryan Cranston, not young, but younger. And then Dale Dye plays the other guy that's there when he's reading the Lincoln letter, who was the military consultant that we're about to talk more about. Amanda Boxer plays the Mama Ryan, Miss Margaret Ryan. And then, of course, I have to shout out Kathleen Byron as old Mrs. Ryan and Harrison Young as old Ryan, who's kind of bookends the film. And that's the crew. There's a lot more. There were a lot more names that kind of pop up. Those were I tried to hit everyone that had like speaking parts. But yeah, that's all those guys. Does any of those? So let me ask you this: who to you stood out like as a performer, other than like Hanks and Sizemore in the rescue crew?
Yeah, so everyone has like their moments, which I really appreciated. So Giovanni Ribisi as T. I don't think he was listed here, but he he was. He was. He has this great monologue about like in the middle they're at a church and it's shot so beautifully. It's so focused on him, and it's just about like how he has this past moment of when he's growing up. His mom worked during the night, so she's sleeping during the day, and like he's or it's one or the other, but basically he doesn't see his mother, and he's always waiting to like stay up to see his mother when she comes home, but he would always fall asleep. But then whenever she would come home in time, he would play like he's acting asleep.
Yeah.
And he never understood why he did that, because like now he's thinking to himself, like, I missed these opportunities to be with her.
Yeah.
And then like his character develops into this just like tragic character who just is like desperately, like, because he's a medic, he's perpetually giving other people opportunity to essentially go home and essentially make amends to like almost their past regrets and nostalgia, and then he never gets that opportunity.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed kind of seeing how his character contrasted with a lot of the other characters who like who just became very callous, and that's a way to survive so many horrors. But his endurance to permit himself to hurt was just really well performed, even to the end. And it's that like character that ends up bringing a newfound life for the rest of the team into the third act, wherein like by the second act they have like really descended into like cynicism and hurt and suffering. And then this character's let's say social sacrifice, inadvertent social sacrifice, ends up bringing back a humanity to the rest. And so he is absolutely a significant one.
And he pulls off that like little monologue in the church just so well. Like,
yes, he does. It is
like
so
lump
good
in your throat. You know, very good.
I know a consistent thing though in terms of the cast and characters that is often brought up is Jeremy Davies as Corporal Upham. And I like this the first time watching it, I first time watching it, like 13, so it's not like I have any understanding of anything by that point. But like this time watching it, like I definitely connected more with two things. One, his character's performance, which is significant as just very well performed.
Yes.
But then also just like perhaps like just the need to have him do maybe a little bit more than just be who he is up until the end of the film. And I do like, I still think the film is like, relatively, insofar as art can be, perfect, but like it is in need of something more than what it is. And but what it develops into and like how it affects Captain Miller and so on and so forth is good. But it as now an adult looking at the film and his performance combined with his character, it just makes it taste different than it did growing up. But otherwise, and then all the bit roles like Giamatti and Cranston and so forth are like, these guys are just pros. They just know what they're doing. And so it's just a cast where like, probably everyone on set was like stressed because the project is so serious, but also like very confident because they're like, man, we've been doing this for years. We know what we're doing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, because Davies does play the part really well. And Spielberg actually talked about how Upham was the character that he most identified with, which is very interesting. I guess just kind of that. I guess it's because like he is like, in a sense, he's kind of like a pacifist. He doesn't want to have the gun. Like he doesn't want to go into the war. He just wants to like translate and read maps. Like he doesn't want to go fight. But he's forced into it. But then when he is forced into it, he turns into a coward. And so I wonder, it might be interesting to talk about at some point, like, why does Spielberg identify with this guy most out of all the characters? Is it putting himself into, like, if he was like to go to war, would he feel like he might be a coward like this guy was? Is it just like I don't know, it's very interesting. I'm not sure exactly. I didn't find anything going into like why he identifies with that character the most. Um, but it's definitely like interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, he's incidentally pulled into the situation. Like,
Yeah.
he probably was at the right position, like where he had the desire to assist, whether he was, perhaps he was drafted, but like if
Yeah.
he volunteered, like he was at a place in which he wanted to help the war effort for the common good, so to speak, but
Hmm.
then was drawn into this thing that is like extraordinary.
Oh
And
yeah.
so like in that way, like it is a compelling character to see develop, but there is something purposefully, and perhaps even to the detriment of the film in terms of enjoyment, that uh he is so um borderline irresponsible
Yeah.
with the understanding of the situation, and that makes it very tough even
It
up to the
does.
last moment. And so it is, for lack of a better term, ballsy to have a character like that in a film like this, but I think that goes in line with what like is desired here, because
Yeah.
I think like even like just talking like the contrast to like the glorification of war violence, like most so a lot of injuries can be from friendly fire, and I don't
Hmm.
recall if there's any friendly fire moments in the film, but the point made here is that like inadvertent cowardice slash chaotic moments lead to error, and like
Yeah.
Davies is like a upham, pardon, is like perpetual error from
Yeah.
beginning to end. And really he shines in his relationships and the way he sees the world, less so much how he responds to it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I think the standout guy for me was Adam Goldberg as Fish. Um,
Dang,
I,
he's so
I
good.
he was
He's
so
so good.
good, like
Yeah.
because it throws you off because the first time you really see him, he's like sobbing. I don't know if you remember
Yes.
that. Like it's
Yes.
right after they get through D-Day. He's like he finds something like a little um I don't know, he finds like a little something. I don't remember what it was. It was a
Right.
little item, and I guess it like triggers something in him, and the wave of what he just went through, and he's like sobbing. And then the rest of the movie, he's like, so like that's what you start off with about this guy. But the rest of the movie, he's like kind of the jokester, and so it's like just this very interesting, like you start off with this guy sobbing, but then he's kind of like the jokester, callous, mostly the rest of the movie, but he's also like, there's moments where that sensitivity comes out in sort like whenever like one of his teammates is like about to die or whatever, like when Caparzo is like bleeding out, it's like it's him, it's Fish that's like keeping eye contact with him and is like
Mm-hmm.
desperately just like I wish I could do something, you know. Um so yeah, I thought he played it very like dynamic, kind of doing different things in this role. So yeah.
Super good. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get a little bit more into the production. So Dale Dye, as we've mentioned, was the military consultant. He had been working in Hollywood for a while now. Like one of the movies he worked on was Platoon. Um, and he kind of moved to Hollywood with the intent of working on movies that were going to have like military stuff because he had been seeing like military stuff in movies and was like kind of fed up with the way they did it, and he was like, I'm going to go fix Hollywood's military and war stuff.
That's so funny.
Yeah, he literally like says that himself.
That's very
So
capitalist. He saw an opportunity, he took it.
yes.
That's good stuff.
Uh-huh. And so Dale Dye comes on board. He does a boot camp with the rescue crew. So Damon doesn't take part in that. The idea was kind of like to reinforce the bonds between the actors on the rescue team. Spielberg doesn't go to that, obviously. He's like, I'm good. So Del Dye takes these guys out. He basically like roughs up these guys for 6 days. They're like hiking all the time. It's cold and wet. They're sleeping on the ground, have these tiny stoves to warm up their food. He's like yelling at them when they're doing something wrong. They're waking up at 5 a.m. for PT. He's like putting them through it. And the funny thing is they kind of, a few of them are telling the story of how like after 3 days they took a vote and like everybody but Tom Hanks voted to go ahead and go back home. Because, you know, they do have the freedom to do that. Like they're not actually actors. They're not actually in boot camp in the military. But Hanks apparently convinces them to stay, and they do another vote and everybody votes to stay.
It's pretty funny.
So I think they did, like, there was the caveat, like they got like extra blankets and warmer clothes and stuff. So that was like their impetus to stay. So they do these like 6 days of just like brutal boot camp. They also do 3 days of weapons training with guns and artillery and tanks. They learn how to like strip their guns and load them and fire them. They learn like marching and hand signals, maneuvering techniques. So he's really like just putting them through all of this training to get them in the mindset of what to do and how to do it and what it was like. I thought it was cool. Hanks talked about how like all the technical stuff was like helpful, but it wasn't as important as just like experiencing that for just 6 days. Like not even like to the extent that these guys back then actually did, but just a mini version of that was what was most important. And Sizemore talked about how Dye really pushed into them the idea of brotherhood. Like you fight, you do whatever it takes to keep the guys around you alive. And that he said that really seeped into the film. Pepper talked about how he told them that they better do the men who died in the war right in the film. And
I'm sure that made them feel great.
Oh yeah. And what's crazy is Del Dye, the dude just like he's just like, I'm here to like make these guys' life miserable so they know what it's really like. And so this is going to be more authentic. Like he was like saying this stuff like in the I don't know that this would like pass today. But back in 98, people were loving hearing this guy talk about how like he like berated these guys for 6 days straight to get them more authentic for the movie.
Honestly, that's like a podcast in its own right. Like 90s exploitation of actors. Because like Blair Witch is the other thing that comes to mind. How like the team for the actors for Blair Witch were given maps that were basically just like go here, and then the directors would have speakers throughout the forest wherever the actors would go to like literally camp and just play horrifying noises so they could never sleep. They would find like packages with food, but they became progressively less and less food each package they'd find. So it's just like literal torture for these actors. It's part of why they're so exhausted. So like I'm sure there's so many films in the 90s that are just full of directors abusing just like their actors because they're like, well, hey, you want to make a movie, right? Come on, guys.
Well, what's funny about this one is like they voted to leave, and then Hanks convinced them to stay.
He's got a great record to hold up. He's like, I'm planning to make a decade of good movies, guys. Come on.
I think Vin Diesel. I remember him saying like, you know, I would never in my life do that again, but I am glad that I did it. So
good for him.
But Hanks said that to also like they basically go straight from this to filming the D-Day sequence. And so he said like without going through that boot camp, he doesn't know if they would have like made it through that shoot. But yeah. And this is actually the first film since E.T. that he shot chronologically.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so full circle. Our two Spielberg movies together. E.T. shot
Nice.
chronologically. Saving Private Ryan shot chronologically. How about that? Yeah, so it was kind of like the idea of Spielberg wanted them to be in the right mindset, like going from start to finish as these characters, so it makes sense. But yeah, they really hit the ground running. I talked about that fast turnaround between Amistad and this movie. And so he didn't really get any pre-planning on location like he typically does. And he actually said that was a blessing in disguise, because a lot of times he's much better just like hitting the deck running. And sometimes like all of his like storyboards and drawings can like actually limit his imagination. And one thing that Spielberg, that I've kind of noticed that he's really good at doing, is like showing up somewhere and just like, and you hear this over and over from people that work with him, is he can like show up on a set and spend like 10 minutes looking around, and then basically like edit the cuts in his mind and just be like, okay, we need a camera here, here, and here to get these shots, because this is how it's going to end up looking. Like he can just like do all that in his mind. He just has to like take it in for a few minutes, and then he's just like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. And yeah, just an incredible, filmmaking mind. So yeah, they didn't storyboard for this at all. Yeah, it's really impressive. He, I'm trying to see where I am in my notes. So yeah, they really start production in June of 1997. It goes through September of 97. And they start off doing the Omaha Beach sequence, which is not actually on Omaha Beach. The French kind of restrictions for filming, where there was, I guess, too much red tape, but also even probably more than that, the infrastructure just didn't wasn't compatible anymore. Obviously after the war there was a lot of rebuilding of infrastructure, and it just didn't look the same anymore. So they found a nearly ideal location in, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but I'm going to say Curracloe Beach, which is near Wexford in southeast Ireland. So they do 11 weeks of prep, which is crazy, for this 24-minute Omaha Beach chaotic sequence. So they do have to do some playing around with the camera, because this beach is not as large as Omaha Beach. So the cliff is actually like much, much closer to the beach than the actual like Omaha Beach D-Day would have been. So they do some like playing around with like depth of field to make it look like there's a longer way to go across the beach before you get to the cliffs where like the German bunkers are. So yeah, they shot there. That was a 15-day shoot. So it makes sense that Tom Hanks said they really needed that boot camp to make it through that D-Day shoot. So other locations, the cemetery scene was actually filmed at the military cemetery in Normandy, a few minutes from Omaha Beach. Colleville-sur-Mer, I'm going to say, is the name of that cemetery. And the crazy thing is, like, most of those crosses you see, like, are from that day. It's like,
just, it's insane.
Yeah. Like that cemetery is comparable to something like, the Arlington military cemetery. But Arlington is just like, is all the wars. And this is basically from that one day, this cemetery. Which is, when you think about it in that context, is like, man, just horrible. But the rest of the filming was mostly done in England. They do some filming for the fake farmhouse for the Ryan home in Wiltshire, kind of as a stand-in for Iowa. The German outpost attack was filmed in a place near Oxford. And then they used an old Hatfield airfield north of London for that final battle sequence. So yeah, it's basically like finding locations to use in England from there on out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the pace of shooting was really fast. They were averaging 4 takes per shot, which aren't that many. So they were really trying to like blast through these, pun not intended. They actually completed a few days ahead of schedule because of that. This is a quote from Spielberg. He said, quote, "War doesn't give you a break, and I didn't want the production of Saving Private Ryan to give them one either," unquote.
It
Yeah,
benefits that they're filming chronologically, because then you can kind of capture the exhaustion
yes,
of the actors, and it probably takes some weight off of the actors to perform, because they can kind of just carry over the reality of like, this is terrible.
yes,
Like it
yes.
just like their characters.
And to
pretty
start
funny.
with that first like 15 days of shooting D-Day is like,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
the stunts, the work, the running, all that stuff. Yeah,
It's
sounds
intense.
terrible.
Yeah. And they're in those like uniforms. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And for Spielberg, adding to the intensity of shooting that sequence, while he was shooting that, he learned about the arrest of this guy, Jonathan Norman, who was trying to enter his home in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood in LA.
Good.
Found with a knife and tape and handcuffs and razor blades. And they said that materials in his car suggested extreme obsession with Spielberg, and he was wanting to take him and his wife hostage. So learns about this while he's like in the middle of filming this sequence.
What the heck?
Yeah. This guy, he was a 30-year-old, actually an apprentice screenwriter apparently. But he did get sentenced to 25 years in prison in June of 98, like a month before the film released.
So he's almost out, or he is out.
Oh no!
Let's see if one of his movies gets made.
Oh man!
Gotta go see it. Gotta cover it on the show.
Yeah, bonus episode. Jonathan Norman script.
My day with Spielberg.
Yeah, I just thought that was like, man, you're already shooting this intense sequence.
Yeah, after 2 other movies he just did with
you
no
have
break.
The stress of like worrying about this guy, yeah, just ridiculous. And yeah, it's the other thing that I thought was interesting that Spielberg did on the set. There was like a scene that I think it was Edward Burns was talking about this in the making of. There was a scene that Spielberg just wasn't liking. They were trying to shoot it, and he was like, "This isn't working." So he got them to like improv some stuff, and he took the transcription of that improv, like they filmed it, wrote it, got the transcript made from it, and he gave that to his writing team to rewrite that scene based off of the improv. So I thought that was really cool. There's some other improv, like apparently the Damon story was kind of improv that he tells while they're like waiting for the German tanks to arrive. But yeah, cinematography. Definitely got to talk about this.
Oh yeah.
Apparently Spielberg did briefly consider doing it in black and white. I'm glad he didn't.
Agree.
But it was not a traditional color process that they used. They really wanted to go for like desaturated colors that were like similar to period archive images. And Spielberg talks about like really wanting to avoid like a Technicolor extravaganza with this movie. And so Janusz Kaminski did several things. He actually like got these special lenses ordered from Panavision and removed the protective coating on the lenses. So lenses at this time had this protective coating on it that would help like with the way it takes in the light. So he took that off to kind of like help desaturate the color and the image. And yeah, he he made sure he was like very, very like adamant about making sure there was no blue skies ever in the film.
Good choice.
Yeah. And then like when they were developing the film, they furthered the color effect by like processing the negative in a way that neutralized a lot of the color. And Kaminsky said that they ended up with about 40% of their original color by the end of the process. Yeah, which comes through in the movie for sure.
Oh yeah, and I think like in the end it obviously comes out positive because like the movie's beautiful, but like it works in terms of like probably saving some production time or even special effects because like uh war times would produce a lot of like fire and smoke, and so the skies would just be like naturally desaturated and
Yeah.
not blue. And so like that's just such a clever way to like look forward to like post production and like thinking about it. And it's pretty early in the age of like extreme special effects, so like it's not like that was on their mind anyway, but it's an interesting technique to do. And then even just thinking of like where war movies or action movies of this capacity have become now, they've imitated that a lot. And then and then very obviously, Band of Brothers in the Pacific, of course, did that, but that's, because they produced it. So it makes sense. And then contrasting with like modern films that I feel like I've watched that have had a war-like atmosphere, I feel like the only ones that like have captured this similar desaturation, which also helps with like making the outfits look more natural because they have a faded look, like they've been worn over and over and over, and gross and sweaty and bloody, whatever. Like the only one I can think of that like also kind of does that is like Lord of the Rings, because even like watching Avengers Endgame with or Avengers well, Endgame too, but Infinity War. I thought of Infinite Warfare from Call of Duty. The colors are way more bright, and it kind of makes it weird to watch this fight scene, because I feel like I've been trained as an audience member to not watch fight scenes with such bright colors, because like I guess like everyone watched Saving Private Ryan and went, oh yeah, this is how it should be. But I digress. Like I think it looks so good on top of that, and then it also still like is beautiful at the same time, because the way the use of lighting, the use of gold, the use of the sunlight, all that jazz. So it's just excellent stuff.
Yeah, apparently too, like the weather was bad for a lot of the shooting, which actually helped. It was like
yeah.
Yeah, and actually like similar to what the weather would have actually been like probably. I think from the history records, but yeah, I would be interested. It's been a long time since I've watched The Thin Red Line, but my memory is that it is the opposite in some ways to this like desaturated look. Malick is very like interested in nature and the the contrast of like the the kind of contrast of humanity and nature. And so my memory of that movie is that it's not World War II. I want to say it's Vietnam, but I'm not going to like plant my flag in that because I'm not 100% sure. But there's more vibrancy in some of that. But I think it's just I would be interested to go back and rewatch that like shortly after watching this, because just to contrast like what the different effects they're going for with the way they used color in their war movie would be interesting to think about. But yeah, they do some different some other tricks with the camera too. They apparently there's like these shutter like the degrees of a shutter is traditionally 180, and they were doing like 90 or 45 degrees sometimes. I'm not sure exactly what that means. There's some like technical things that I haven't learned enough about to understand what they mean. But I did write down this quote so that I could let Kaminsky talk for himself. He said, we used a different shadow degree to achieve a certain staccato in the actor's movement. We got a crispness of explosions. Everything we shot became just slightly more realistic. And so I think it's like just the feel that you get in the final product feels more like that newsreel kind of footage.
Yes.
That I think that's what that shutter degrees ends up giving the effect of. And you do have like the handheld. I think so. The handheld thing is really interesting because this was not like common, especially for like mainstream movies at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
We see more of it now, but there was not like handheld action sequences at this time. It just wasn't really a big thing. So I thought that was really something worth emphasizing, is that Spielberg's kind of on the front end of that style of shooting an action sequence.
He a lot of like action sequences are still embrace like standard film language of like wide angles, or maybe at least a little closer, but very much the audience existing as like an omniscient viewer. And then here, like, it's very clear with the opening scene, he wants to put you in the position of the soldiers. And that's why, like, even the pace of that opening D-Day sequence, like, there are scenes of like the camera right next to like the MG-42 shooting at the, you know, Ally soldiers. And then there are scenes where the camera slowly inches forward as the, you know, Allied soldiers move up the beach.
Right.
And that's it. And so like you're getting a lot of like borderline POV, and even one moment that is literally just POV of what's going on. And that also just goes well with the fact that the opening sequence is like focusing on the eyes of a you know, by the time the movie starts, an unknown old man, and then transitioning into like you're now seeing these eyes. So it's impressive, and it's a really good choice. I feel like the only other couple times I've heard of like handheld being used is like a couple moments in, like, to mention Carpenter again, but like Halloween has some handheld camera. And like at the time POV that was stuff. Super new. And again, POV. And then nowadays, like, handheld is used just because it's easier. You don't have to lug around this giant thing.
Well, and even like more just thinking about like a very like comparable director, and Christopher Nolan has done a lot of handheld work, but in a different way. Like he's kind of like changed the craft of how handheld looks, because they've developed these technologies and these like ways of anchoring the camera in handheld where it's still pretty smooth. But you still get the effect of like the close quarters without the shaky cam handheld stuff. So yeah, just interesting to see how it's like that style has like progressed since then. But just like to go through some of the like production design and effect stuff. So in the opening Omaha sequences, they obviously had to get some landing craft. And funnily enough, they sourced most of them from Palm Springs, of all places. It's very random. I think they did get some, like maybe a couple from England and Scotland, but most of them were from Palm Springs. And then they didn't obviously have enough of those, and so ILM did go in and like enhance, adding more ships in post for like wide shots. And then they had the Irish Army come in. They provided 750 soldiers, some of whom had been in Braveheart, actually, a few years before. So they, I guess, were a little familiar with being on a set. But yeah, they had 750 real Irish soldiers. They had 1,000 or so fake corpses made for that beach. And they even had about 20 actors that were amputees to add some more like authenticity to to some of those characters that have arms blown off or whatever, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. I guess it's good to get some amputee representation.
Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
More Carpenter connections. It's like the thing. That's
yeah.
what they use for one of the effects there.
Yeah.
It's an amputee. So makes sense.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
actually he does that again with AI, which I'll talk about in that episode, which I've already recorded. But he has some of the like robot AI characters that are amputees with like devices on their arms.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Del Dye, of course, is intervening when explosives look too much like pyrotechnic displays. He's like, no, it wouldn't look like this. I guess he's done berating the actors. Now he's berating Spielberg when the effects look bad. And I did read this, that at the time, a lot of specialists were still like identifying multiple errors in the military equipment use. I didn't really find like a list of what they thought was wrong, but I mean, that's inevitable. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching like some movies or even like TV shows or music videos that had like period piece setup stuff, and my dad having knowledge of like, like most dads having knowledge of war stuff would be like, those patches are not correct.
Right.
Like those don't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so, like that makes total sense. It sounds like the broad strokes and the majority of the material is pretty accurate. And that's really what matters.
It is.
But the Saving Private Ryan pop collectors who complain about the authenticity of their material might just have to put up with it.
It's like, come on, guys! It is still a movie. It's not It's not archived documentary footage.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did have they had thousands of extras that needed costumes, so they did have to like make a ton of costumes. I think the lady said they had made 3,500 uniforms. They tried to like find some that they could like borrow, and there just weren't any. So they had to make all of them. It was funny listening to her because she was like, she played it off really cool, but I can only imagine she was like, I didn't realize what I was signing up for when I got on this movie, because you have to not only like make thousands of uniforms, but also like age them and make them look used.
Yes.
Yeah. Very intensive.
This is you're reminding me of a thought I had consistently watching the movie, so I just want to cut in and mentioning like how there's thousands of or hundreds at least of extras. Watching this, I kept thinking like, this is an era of like, because it's like just before the extreme transition to like embracing CG, where it really felt like we continued through the 80s into the 90s of like peak filmmaking, where like 80s, part of why people love the 80s in filmmaking is because it's just before CG became more common. So you get a lot of really talented, impressive special effects.
Right.
And then here, like the same thing is kind of true, where I kept thinking like, if this was made nowadays, there might be like 30 extras, and then they would be like repeated across the set to like look like it's hundreds.
Right.
But here it's like, no, they just like cast like, or they hired a bunch of extras to come on.
Right.
And like, it just looks so good. Then there's all these sets they constructed and this and that, whatever. And so I kept thinking like, I
even like the fake corpses, like actual fake corpses that they made.
It's so gross, and it's because like they had the integrity to embrace like what they're doing and make it look realistic and authentic, and there are good CG moments. I mean, Spielberg obviously with Jurassic Park, but like I kept thinking like, we are so beyond that era now, and it's just such a refreshing thing to watch Saving Private Ryan and be disgusted because it's so tactile, and permitting
we really
itself
only have
to do all that.
Christopher Nolan, like that's all we have left.
because even Spielberg kind of is like, to the wayside, kind of comfortably embracing special effects. And then
speaking of Ready
Cameron's like,
Player One,
goodness,
it's
yeah, oh my gosh,
like
where
you're
I'm
berated
desperate
with
for it to
them.
be a little more tactile. And then Cameron like does not care at all anymore, and so and that's kind of in line. He's always been interested in special effects, but it was super refreshing and disappointing at the same time, metatextually speaking, because it's here we are at this like almost precipice of like, this is so good, I can't wait to see what's next, and then like boom, it just goes down and turns into the Mandalorian Superdome that's used for almost every Disney project now. And you're watching the trailer for Wicked, which comes out in like 2 days, one day, I don't know, it's Thursday,
at the time
right?
of our
Like
recording.
today. And I'm like, the trailer, you're watching it thinking like, there's no sets. So no extras, no sets, no nothing. So anyways, it just, everything looks like Naboo now. Like it just looks like Naboo. So
thanks, Lucas.
we'll
blame it all on Lucas.
Man alive.
I mean, like, okay, I'm going to just like emphasize your point. 2,000 weapons used, 500 of them could shoot blanks. Another 1,500 were like rubber ones that are like being carried around. You have like liquid propane being used to simulate flamethrower flames. You have, I mean, these guys are actually stuntmen are actually on fire,
Yeah, the stunts are nuts.
They're
crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. You have, okay, so the ending at Ramel is literally none of that was there. They built all of that stuff. They were like, okay, we need this village that has a river running through it with a bridge. That river was not there. That they dug that thing and put 2 to 3 feet of water in it. It's incredible. It looks phenomenal. They build all of these buildings. They like make them look like they've been exploded. And they're going to construction sites around and buying debris from construction sites to like toss around their set. It looks incredible. It really does. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. It just looks so good. They're even like, so like thinking of special effects. So like, if you think about the tank, when the tank shoots the building, and like the building collapses and like a cloud of dust, like a wave comes over Jeremy Davies as Upham, like of dust. They have this like, they actually like explode the building, of course. And they have this like crane holding this big crate that when the building gets shot, like when the explosive goes off, the crate drops like a ton of debris, like extra like dirt and debris, so that you get this like huge cloud. Like that's real. It's not added in post. It's an actual huge cloud of dust that's dropped that they dropped from the sky, and it just all looks great. They one of the things I thought was cool, so like stunt wise, they would use these like tricks in the framing of the shot to kind of hide the fakeness of some of the stunts. So especially like one of the things that they talked about was whenever they were, especially like on that D-Day sequence, whenever a guy was like exploding up into the air, they would use this trick where they would have like some soldiers maybe run in front of the camera in that moment where it looks the fakest. And so like you're really like, you see the soldier running in the background, some like legs of soldiers pass in the foreground, and you see the explosion and the guys like up in the air by the time they pass.
Fascinating.
Pass by.
That's so smart.
I was like, that's genius, because sometimes those things do look a little bit fake. You're like, okay, I know that guy was like pulled on a cable. And you can kind of tell, but that like just that simple framing like trick that they use to kind of hide that fake, more fake aspect. Just super like well thought out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the sound. They took very particular care with the sound. They didn't use any electronic simulations for weapons, so it's all like
Smart.
it's all actually like recording bullets firing. They're firing bullets near mics. They're recording different bullets hitting different objects. For for bullets hitting flesh, they actually like recorded shooting beef carcasses in a slaughterhouse. So yeah, they're they're really going for authentic here, I guess. Gary Rydstrom is just like he might be the GOAT sound guy. Uh, all of the great like sounding movies are like go back to Gary Rydstrom. I feel like in this era,
Mm-hmm.
he says he did more research than ever. And one of the things he talked about was how like when he talked to a lot of vets, like World War II vets, and he said that he was super surprised at how much sound was a part of their memory. And this is something that I think people are more aware of now, how like sounds can like set off PTSD.
Oh yeah.
People are like way more aware of that then, but Rydstrom was just talking about how surprised he was that that was such a huge thing. And like one of the things he talked about was how like even not just like sound like setting off like PTSD, but just like remembering sounds that were like so specific. So they talked. He said one thing that came up a bunch of times was how the ping of the M1 rifle when you ejected a cartridge was like a very distinct sound, and so much so that like Germans would listen for that sound, and then they would come out and fire whenever they would hear it, and then the Americans caught on, and so they would have someone like eject a cartridge to draw Germans out, to like thinking that they were out of ammo or whatever. So just one example of like sounds that they like things that they tried to put in the movie. These sounds.
I want to. I didn't see if you had this at the end with like Impact or Legacy, but I know that like Saving Private Ryan hugely influenced like Call of Duty, like its early era. Now it's Call of Duty is its own crazy thing, but like I wonder, like talking about sound, like part of why it's much more distinct and understood and expected now is because of like things like video games where like as you're playing them and they're pursuing simulating reality, like that ping noise, and actually a lot of moments in early Call of Duty games, whether 1, 2, 3, 4, not so much 4 because it's Modern Warfare, but World at War 5, like very overtly influenced, even down to the taking a mortar shell, smacking it against something, and then throwing it kind of thing. Are all greatly influenced by like a lot of what's drawn out from this film. And then in that way, I'm sure like nowadays you'd watch it and the distinct idea of them being memorable is so much more present. So yeah, that's interesting to think about.
It's I'm trying to remember. So I just released today, as we're recording, obviously when this comes out it'll be a couple months ago probably, but I talked about like kind of the history of DreamWorks in that episode. And DreamWorks did at one point have a video game division. And I'm trying to remember the game they put out. Medal of Honor.
Medal of Honor. Yeah.
So Medal of Honor was like deeply influenced and like inspired by Spielberg's work on this movie. So yeah, I don't know. I would imagine like that game. When was the first Call of Duty game? Like mid 2000s?
2004, maybe 2003. So, I know it was on like PS2 before, on like the 7th gen or 6th gen consoles. But
probably this movie, along with like Medal of Honor probably. I'm sure if Medal of Honor was influenced by this movie, it probably like had a big focus on sound, I would imagine.
Mhm.
So
Oh yeah.
I'm sure that's there for sure. And yeah, I mean, um, they really focused on, I mean, you have like the bullets underwater in the first scene, which is
Mhm.
actually like a sound that he took from a movie that he worked on called A River Runs Through It. And it's the sound of like a fly casting line being whipped off of this water surface.
Hmm.
Super smart. This guy's like always like pulling strange sounds that he remembers recording for something else, like to put in other movies.
That's cool.
Yeah, you have, so for the parts where like you have the Captain Miller being shell shocked and that point of view where everything kind of fades out.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
He was trying to think like, okay, what does it sound like when you're only hearing yourself? And he was like, I bet it's like kind of like a seashell, like listening to a seashell. And so he recorded the ocean, and then he played that recording through out of a speaker through a tube and recorded that.
Interesting.
And that's like
Yeah.
the sound you're hearing, that kind of like that whirring, like in your head sound. And then like they did a lot of work like even with just like the atmosphere sounds. So he was talking about watching a lot of archive footage, and there's this kind of like ominous sound of a thunderstorm that sounds kind of like a thunderstorm in the distance of like bombs going off and stuff. And so they added that into like, you can really hear that in like the church scene where there's this kind of atmosphere of like thunderstorm or maybe war in the distance going on. You have incredible like sound transitions, even where there's that one shot of like the rain starting to drip on some leaves and some water, and that sound actually transitions into the sound of gunfire.
So good.
Which that
Great
feels like
stuff.
a Malick move, actually.
Yeah, I actually thought the same thing.
Yeah. But yeah, and then he was going for like this. He actually said that Spielberg told him to watch this movie Zulu, and there's this part where the Zulu warriors are approaching and they're like beating their shields, and he kind of took that as influence for the tanks approaching for that last battle.
Great stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, he's just like, the sound is just incredible in this movie. He's like scraping metal on plates, and for the tank sounds, like that's. And he talked about how vets were coming up to him and saying like, I don't know how like you captured the sound of like those tanks, like it sounds just like they sounded. Yeah, so I mean, it's and really incredible sound. The score, what did you think about the score for this movie? Because I thought it was fine.
It's interesting. I feel like it's sort of become like, of all the things out of Saving Private Ryan, which is still a very like reverential film,
right?
And part of what it's successful at being, like the score is what's kind of become like a meme, and like that type of like, it's almost become like ironic to have like that faux reverential, like for the troops, quote unquote, type music. And I think part of that is like, it's been so heavily co-opted by like political aesthetics to be used. And in that way, like it's lost a lot of its like oomph. And like,
that's interesting. Yeah.
Cause it's like, it is obviously being very evocative of from the beginning of I forget the term, but like when soldiers die, they have, the trumpet off in the distance playing. Right. It's like this song
like
that's
the
like
taps and
taps. And so like a lot of the tunes to the song feel very much like born out of that. And in that way, like that's a positive and a good thing. But it's very hard to take it seriously when it's sort of transitioned into
Yeah.
this like, if you actually care about America, you will vote so and so. And like and you know why? Because we like this music.
Yeah.
And so it just gets a little ridiculous. But when you kind of get over that, and it's very easy to do so, the movie itself is in no way affected by it. Also, because there's not much music.
There
like,
isn't. And I think
Williams
that's actually
barely
the
does the
best
work
part
here.
Yeah, that's the best part of the score, is that they decide not to play the score in like the battle sequences and stuff at all. And so they really only use the score to kind of like emphasize more dramatic moments. And
Yes.
And you know, I think it's fine. I don't think it's a bad score. And it is interesting to think about it in the way that you were like framing it, in that I wonder if it would have played differently at the time than it does now, having like heard this sort of music over and over again. But
well, and to contrast, just because of what this will be influencing with HBO, like the Band of Brothers score is like obviously way more prominent throughout the series, and like genuinely 1,000 times stronger. It has motifs, it has consistent the fact that it has motifs that it draws onto throughout the material also makes it much more a part of the story, as opposed to like the music here, which is more of just like a supplement to the character dialogue or character moments, which is not as like strong or valuable. Like when you think of like Williams working on Star Wars, you're like, oh, there's motifs, there's songs, there's moments that draw on particular things, even up to episode 3. Not so much the sequel series, which I found just like his scores were just like, man, let the guy rest. let him retire. But like here, it's also lacking, I feel, in terms of like being a part of it, but I think it's serviceable in doing the job, because the movie's not about the music, it's about the characters.
It's not. And I think like, I mean, like just thinking again about like the other episode that we did together in ET, the score like is such a huge part of the movie. Like it's so vital. And in this one, it's just like, it's just interesting. And even like in the making of Doc stuff, like John Williams talks about how so many of his projects with Spielberg he appreciates because Spielberg has him doing so many different types of scores. Like they're hardly ever like too much the same as the last one.
No, not at all.
And so like even on a movie like this, where it's like, okay, your music in this one is going to be taking kind of a backseat. Like Williams like really appreciates it. It's a different challenge. Okay, how do I fit into that mode for this movie? So yeah, and I always appreciate, it's hard not to appreciate John Williams, even when like he has a score that's like maybe not like his best standout iconic scores, but they're still like, they're always solid,
Yes. It's strong. It's strong.
I'm noticing in my notes, I have like no notes under editing and post-production. And
it's good.
It's just, I'm just going to emphasize this point. I wish there was more talk about editing in like making of documentaries, and in like, I
agree,
and in books about films, because editing like is movie making at the end of the day. And I just feel like it's not talked about enough. And I would love to hear more about how movies were edited and the choices in that. So
I think I remember, to add to your point, I think I remember reading something that mentioned like editing is exclusive to the medium of filmmaking. Whereas like, music, you're not changing the song by reorienting the melody, the chorus,
the mix,
and the bridge. But like a movie literally can be changed, fixed, and reordered and made better by putting scenes in different orders. Apart from what you intended in production and pre-production. And so
and like even like a scene,
important.
Even like a dialogue scene can be dramatically changed by the way you edit the shots together.
Yes.
So I just wish there was more out there. I don't have anything in my notes for it because there wasn't anything in my research about the editing, and
Hmm.
I don't know. I would say this is an extremely well edited movie, like top notch editing.
2 hours and
So
40 minutes. It goes by in no time. Like
yes,
the pacing here is so expertly
yes,
constructed.
and that's another thing. Pacing
So
is
good.
the edit. The edit
Yeah.
determines the pace of the movie.
Mhm.
Yes, you can shoot scenes a certain way. Yes, you can have like a certain pace to your acting, but it all comes down to the way it's edited. So that's my short rant on we need more editing content out there.
Yes. Yes, please.
Interviewers, ask the directors about the editing process, please. If you're out there and you're interviewing directors, ask more questions about the edit.
Yes, please.
But yeah, so this movie is released on July 24th, 1998. So that would be the day after I turned 7 years old.
The day after well, not day, but year in which I would probably be 3 or 2.
Yeah.
So
my birthday is the day
Fabermel.
before that. So I just turned 7. So I did not see this movie in theaters.
Dang. That would have been cool, though.
Yeah. That would have been wild. I would not. I mean, I would put money on there was definitely 7-year-olds in the theater watching this movie, because parents are always taking kids to movies they shouldn't be in. It's the American way, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, so this movie releases only 7 months after Amistad, so really quick turnaround there. And yeah, it opens #1 opening weekend. It ends up with a worldwide box office of $482 million.
It's wild.
Which in 98 money is probably like at least twice that much in today's money, if not more.
Mhm.
So that's just wild to think about, that a movie like this earning that much in the box office. And nearly 50% of that was earned domestic too. And I mean, it only had a $65-70 million budget.
Which is crazy. Like, come on.
Which actually,
I know, like inflation
is
a lot,
pretty
but
big budget.
still.
Yeah. Pretty big budget back then, but like, yeah, it made all that back. This was interesting too. It's only the third rated R movie to reach $200 million domestic. So the other two had been Terminator 2 and Beverly Hills Cop at that point in film history. So I thought that was interesting. What is crazy to think about is Spielberg and Hanks refused their base salary and opted instead for 17.5% each of the studio profits. So, well, yeah.
I mean, that's money.
Like they're getting basically over 400 million. So 17% of over 400 million. I mean, that's
160 million.
Yeah, I guess between the two. So like, I mean, yeah, they made a lot of money. Spielberg and Hanks off this movie. Let's just say that. The reception of the movie at the time. So nationally, critics mostly praised it. I think, obviously, critics that had long been doubtful of Spielberg, even after Schindler's List, saw this as a real watershed moment for his emotional maturity, which I thought was interesting. They felt like he was finally really, truly trusting his audience and manipulating them honestly, which is an interesting thing to think about. And I think is true to some degree. Like there are cases where like, you're being manipulated, but you also know that like it makes sense to be manipulated emotionally in that way.
Yeah.
To get the right feelings out of you for that scene. So
to continue the consistent comparison to Band of Brothers and the future stuff, this is very blunt, and Band of Brothers is way more nuanced about what it's exploring, because it's also episodic. So every episode is exploring something new.
Yeah,
whereas
and you
this
have more
is
like character development in Band of Brothers too, just because you have more time to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Stephen Hunter in the Washington Post said that quote, the greatest war movie ever made and one of the great American movies, unquote. So that's pretty high praise, I would say. Todd McCarthy in Variety said, quote, no further commentary is needed when the raw brutality of combat is presented as indelibly as it is here, unquote. So I would say it got some pretty high praise.
Mm-hmm.
Those two quotes are pretty representative of how a lot of critics felt about the movie at the time. Not everyone loved it. There was a William Goldman essay that's kind of notorious for really ripping the movie to shreds. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that when we get past this last little bit of the reception of the movie, because I think he has some interesting points about the movie in the last act that are going to be interesting to talk about. In England and France, it was received with a little bit more reticence than it was here. They thought that there were crudely portrayed characters. I mean, it's a very American movie in that they're very American characters. So it's I don't know that I can trust the the opinion of England and France, English and French people on how crudely portrayed the characters are when they're American characters, but whatever. Nell Norman in the Evening Standard, which is an English publication, said, quote, it seems almost banal in its achievement, a film that sacrifices humanity for technical wizardry. I think that's a little off base, but
I wonder what he's responding to there, because if he's responding to the fact that the film displays war as dehumanizing, where you have scenes of characters who are so disoriented by war that they're looking for their disarmed arm, or a character at the end who just literally gets turned into a mist by a 20 millimeter cannon or something. I could understand maybe that, where you're showcasing technical wizardry in contrast to the humanity of what took place. But I think that would be a case of and I guess if there hadn't been a war movie like this to this degree, I couldn't criticize you for being what ticket did you think you were buying?
Right.
But that's what's coming into my mind is what ticket did you think you were buying? But yeah, I guess for the time, that would have been very shocking to see. Because I forgot that guy at the end just gets obliterated. Both of them. There's the one guy with the sticky bomb who for some reason doesn't throw it, and then the other guy who is on the tank.
It is a sticky bomb.
That was what it was too. And then there's the other guy who is on the tank when the gun shoots through him and he just turns into mist.
Which the sticky bomb thing is apparently a real thing that they did.
I can believe it. I can totally believe it.
I almost wonder if he's just I almost wonder if he just feels by technical wizardry, he just maybe means oh yeah, it's so focused on the trying to capture the brutality of war that you lose all the human aspects, but to come to that, I almost feel to come to that conclusion, you would have had to maybe go to the bathroom during all the in-between scenes.
The human stuff.
Where they're discussing stuff, and I don't know. It seems like a strange take to me.
That is an interesting take.
Yeah. There was another a French review by Gerard Lefort in Liberation, a French publication, where he was talking about the inability of the movie to transcend the subject, as the opening had led one to hope. So he said, quote, foot by foot, shot by shot, the never seen before gives way to the deja vu. In the course of this acknowledgement, attention wanes, enjoyment melts away, and consequently also the famous fund of emotion of which Spielberg is the chief banker, unquote. So his kind of take is that as the movie goes on, it's almost like a take of you're so that opening and Omaha Beach is so crazy and chaotic and breathtaking and emotional that like nothing else in the movie lives up to that. So like as you go through the movie, you're kind of like you start off so strong that the rest of the movie you're maybe let down emotionally and I don't know. That's kind of seems like what he's saying in that quote.
It's like a mix of that combined with the fact that like Spielberg at his best is so good at emotional, like catharsis. Because like obviously Jaws, like every time you see that in a theater, it's always packed and everyone claps at the end.
Yeah.
And Jurassic Park is, you know, like,
Similar,
just amazing. And then E.T., everyone's weeping at the end. And so like I could totally see that like you have this film that like starts out at such a for lack of a better term, like such a high of such emotional intensity that like it doesn't quite keep it by the end. But I think that's because it's setting the, like, I think it's a matter of reading the text in terms of like it sets the groundwork to then go into the like the way humanity treats itself after such events and like changes and evolves and so in that way, like I almost see like his interpretation as like a response to Spielberg's career, but perhaps a not full understanding of like the film, the film on its own.
Well, I think too, that's an interesting thought, and I also think in addition to that, like it's kind of a misunderstanding of the whole point of starting you off in that moment, which is to literally like put you in the mindset of these guys. Like it's like this chaotic, you have no idea what's going on, and then you have to like you're seeing people explode all around you, like, you know, all of your friends are dying, you know, and then you have to like go on from there and like keep living and keep trying to like do a mission, and it's disorienting, like. And so I think like what he saw as a weakness is actually like kind of the point. So um not all the critics abroad were this wary of the movie's appeal. Samuel Blumenfeld of Le Monde, another French publication, said, quote, "The Morning of a Certain America, in the style of Frank Capra, a filmmaker with whom he is obsessed. That is to say, a country united, supported, preserved in the respect of certain values, of which the family is cornerstone. Saving Private Ryan is the first film in which Spielberg yields and draws the line between what he can and cannot film." So he was just, I guess, another guy just really kind of like coming on board with the Spielberg as a mature director now kind of thing.
Interesting.
So, but yeah, the movie went on to be very revered. Spielberg actually like got some personal honors. He was honored by the Department of Defense, the Smithsonian, and other American institutions. Bill Clinton, who was one of his friends, actually gave him a National Medal of Humanities in 1999. And he was made a commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2001. I did not know what that was, but I looked it up, and apparently it is an award given by the British monarch to recognize a person's prominent role at the national level, a leading role in regional affairs, or a distinguished contribution to their field, which I guess this would be the latter of those. I guess they saw this movie as a distinguished contribution to the field of filmmaking. I was like, what is a commander of the Order of the British Empire? I was like, I got some weird names for honors over there. Let me just say.
Oh yeah, that's why we left. Never going back. We're done.
Yeah. So it did get nominated for 11 Oscars. So
makes sense.
It makes sense for sure. It didn't win all of them. It won 5. The 6 that it didn't win, Hanks did not win for lead actor. Which, to be honest, like he is really good. Like I could definitely see him winning for this role. I think he's great in it.
Oh yeah, yes,
yeah,
super good.
Oh yeah. Screenplay, didn't win art direction and set decoration, makeup, original score, and best picture, which it lost to Shakespeare in Love of all movies.
Yeah,
Which
a movie I don't think anyone talks about. Like,
not really.
and that's kind of common for
I
Best
haven't
Picture
seen
winners,
it,
but
but
still.
so I can't really say, it should have lost to this movie, but yeah. Harvey Weinstein apparently lobbied real hard for that movie. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about that guy.
And that's that.
It did win in 5 categories though. It won for cinematography, for sound mixing, for editing. Shout out again to the editing.
Yes.
And Spielberg won his second Best Director Oscar, which I think is very deserving. And in his speech, he dedicated the film to his dad. He said, quote, "Dad, you're the greatest. Thank you for showing me that there is honor in looking back and respecting the past. I love you very much. This is for you," unquote.
Sweet.
Gotta love a dedication to a parent for an Oscar speech. Loved it. And then, yeah, like we said, Spielberg and Hanks kept their World War II obsession going together, producing Band of Brothers in the Pacific, which I've seen all of Band of Brothers and probably half of the Pacific. So
yeah, it seems pretty consistent. The conjecture is like Band of Brothers is like, just a banger. It's like perfect piece of media. And then like the Pacific is like, ooh, this is not perfect. It's supposed to be quite interesting, but not.
What's interesting, I actually have like the little 10, DVD set of Band of Brothers. I think I might have Pacific too. I don't remember.
But, I know the 10 though. I remember. I think we owned a DVD of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's what's cool about those is like, you have obviously the miniseries in there, the 10 episodes of Band of Brothers, but there's so much cool history stuff and like interviews with veterans and
with the veterans. Yeah.
Oh, it's so all that stuff is like maybe even cooler than the show.
I think like by memory, like each episode even would have like interviews that you could optionally watch at the end of each one to then like get a follow. It's like so
talking about the things that
compelling.
happened in that episode.
Yeah, it's really neat. And then I do believe I don't know if they produced Spielberg and Hanks produced this, but there's a third kind of in the series that specifically I think has to do with like Air Force. I forget the name of it, but it's like very underseen. It was like in the last like 5 years, but
I don't even know about that.
Yeah. Well, not many people do, it seems. I think it kind of like came and went because, the Pacific didn't really, succeed well.
Yeah.
Like Band of Brothers really was like when it came out, it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it's an incredible series. So
yeah, it's stellar stuff.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into just kind of digging a little deeper into the movie and its themes and whatnot. I wanted to start with things that might be considered quibbles with the movie, just so that we could like end on the better stuff and not like end with quibbles. But let's talk about. Actually, here's what I want to do. I'm going to skip around in my notes. Let's talk about the William Goldman review. This was actually a last minute addition to the notes. I knew that there was this review, but I read it just a little bit ago before we started recording and added some extra notes. So William Goldman wrote this like essay. He actually wrote like it was like a series of essays about the Best Picture nominees during this time, and so obviously one of them was about Saving Private Ryan. And he actually really enjoyed the movie up to the point after they find Private Ryan. So that's I don't think he likes the whole old guy at the beginning stuff, but starting after that, he actually really loved it. And so after they find Private Ryan, he just like goes into this like ripping all the story apart. Like He's like, this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad. And so his first quibble is that the whole like deliberation of do we leave him or do we stay with him is like totally like ridiculous to him. He's like, here you have this kid, like he feels like the motivation of Ryan to stay is like only half believable, which I don't know. Like I feel like you can kind of get on board with like these are his brothers now.
Yeah, Ryan's motivation is sensible.
Yeah, so I don't really agree with him there, but I did think it was at least like interesting. He said he kind of gave this analogy of like your friends ask you to take their kid to school for them the next day, and you show up, and the kid's like, I can't go today because this cool thing is happening, or my friend is coming over. And so you're like, okay, well, do I just leave him here, or do I stay with him and watch him while his friend comes over? It's like, okay, but what about the third option? Say, no, you're going to school and I'm taking you to school. And so he talks about like this whole like deliberation between Miller and Horvath, Hanks and Sizemore's characters, where they're like going back and forth, and they're like, oh, well, he has a point, we can leave him here, or how about this? Maybe, we stay and maybe we'll make it out on the other side with him and stuff. And he's just kind of like, or why don't you tell this private, no, you're going with me. This is my mission.
Orders
this is my orders. This is my orders. And I was like, you know what? That's actually that's actually a good point. And he even said you could even still have that final sequence. His fix was, okay, you're like, no, you're coming with us. They start to leave, and then all of a sudden you hear the tanks coming, and you're like, oh crap, we've got to make a plan. And so like I was like, man, that actually is a pretty good script edit, to be honest. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. I think the movie's still fine as it is. But I thought that was a very interesting thing. He also really hated having the Steamboat Willie German guy be the one that kills Captain Miller, which I didn't even notice, to be honest.
It's debated whether or not it's the same actor. So some people have interpreted that Steamboat Willie, who is the man who they release, is then brought back.
He definitely is, because there's the scene where Upham is like holding up the guys after the planes come through, and that Steamboat Willie character goes Upham, like he recognizes them. So he's definitely there.
It could be. Is that the guy who he shoots then?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I couldn't remember if like he doesn't look totally the same in the end sequence, because both the German in the end and then Steamboat Willie have their hats off, so it's very easy to see their facial features, and they do look quite different, but that could also be performance, whereas like Steamboat Willie is trying to be pathetic in terms of performance, and then the German at the end is trying to be harsh and confident. But I also saw stuff online about like people talking about like that interpretation. I do think it like the ethic of what is being talked about still stands, that like sometimes you release people, sometimes you don't, and sometimes like they come back to target you. And in this case, like the film does both. Like if it's not Steamboat Willie, it is able to show like you could let someone go, and perhaps outside of your own knowledge they end up being
the one that
being a prisoner of war, and that's it. But you also have the risk of if you don't take that shot, they might shoot you or someone you love. And so I mean it is the crime of the Upham character is that it gets to this ending of like just like what you don't want to have seen by the end. You want to see this character get to the end and like at least go up the staircase and save Private Mellish, and then he can't do it, and it's like almost distractingly frustrating. So
for sure,
I get it.
And it's like, so Goldman's like big beef was that like it negates the whole moral like stance that that Captain Miller takes in that moment of like, I'm going to let this guy go. And then you have it come back. You have this guy come back and kill him in the end. And then I personally think that is Steamboat Willie. I don't know. I didn't notice that he was the one that shot Captain Miller, but I do like pretty strongly believe that is him there at the end
language.
that Upham shoots, because he says Upham. Like he calls him by name. He recognizes him. And he would have known his name because he was sitting there with them German. digging graves for a while, and Upham was the translator. So,
right.
Yeah. And so like Goldman felt that it negated that and like made the whole like war logic to be the bit. He said the point was that Miller dies. Like that is a important thing that makes sense to happen emotionally. Yes. He said, but like that emotion is negated by if that is Steamboat Willie that kills him, because then it's like, oh, the war logic is what we should have gone with. You know, you don't kill this guy, he might come back and kill you. And so it like reinforces the war logic that we're trying to stay away from, instead of like the point that like war is hell and now Captain Miller is dead. And so
that's an interesting read, because
I thought it was interesting too.
Part of like in contrast, at least his interpretation, what I think it would reinforce is the honorableness of Miller, that Miller and the entire group are in the position of power and authority, judge, jury, and executioner, to kill this man, and they permit him to go.
Yeah.
And by then, at the end, him making it, assuming it's Steamboat Willie, killing Miller in the end, it then reinforces like two things. One, that Miller was convinced and had a goodness to permeate across the group and do the right thing. And then two, that like the kindness that he shared is now the like in spite of the evil that is expressed in his death. So in other words, it makes the evil worse. So I don't necessarily like I kind of see it differently, in that like it actually makes Miller more heroic, not in being foolish, but more and not even necessarily naive, but more in a like in opportunity of being killed, he still chose what was right to do.
Yeah.
Because they're not in combat when they finally get to the guy. Like he is kind of knocked out, and out of anger, one of the soldiers goes to just beat the crap out of him.
Yeah.
Which is like, that is no longer like quote unquote laws of warfare, of which there really aren't any, but like, you know, like it's not honorable, so to speak. So it's
no, I like your read. Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a degree to which, like, I think Goldman is being a little bit too nitpicky with that. Because, like, at the end of the day, like, the moral choice that Miller makes is the same moral choice either way. And so, I don't think it really negates that, if that is Steamboat Willie that shoots him in the end. But it is, I did still think that it was an interesting read and something that should be discussed. So, and then, Goldman just did not like the book ending with Ryan. This is something interesting. So and he wasn't the only one. There was a lot of people that didn't like the fact that you start with this old man and it like does a close up on his eyes and then like fades to them on the boats headed toward, Omaha Beach. And so they felt like it was like this kind of manipulative trick to make you think that the old man is supposed to be Captain Miller or somebody that was there at D-Day. And then in the end, it does the little face morph thing, and you realize like, oh, this is supposed to be Ryan, like Private Ryan as an old man. And they felt like it was kind of like a dirty trick, and like, but Goldman even went further than that and said like it makes it feel phony, because like you're told this whole story and then you you go back and it's like this guy that wasn't even there, like, for that story. And
It's a funny
so
read.
he said it should have been someone like, it should have been like the Edward Burns character, like Ryben or somebody like that, kind of like at his thing, and at his gravesite, visiting his gravesite, because he was actually there on D-Day. He was a part of the group the whole time, and visiting the grave at the end of his life, saying,
Yeah, and he
hey,
lives. Yeah.
this guy, we saved this guy. He didn't do anything maybe spectacular, but like he lived a good life. It was worth it because that guy got to live his life or whatever. That was kind of his fix for that whole
Yeah,
thing.
that's interesting. I think there are two things it makes me think of. One is, well, three, I say. The first one is, it's just clever, like, filmmaking to set you up to think Miller's going to make it to the end.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the quote unquote trick. I think
totally,
that's fine.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good filmmaking in terms of just broad, overarching, like, storytelling and thrilling movie language. So that's cool, because, like, yeah, you really don't, if you don't know the movie, you do not think Miller's going to die at the end, because you're like, oh, well, he's there at the end, right? Like, he's a lot, and it's like, no.
But it is it is one of those decisions that like some people are not going to like. It's like some people are going to be like, oh, and then some people are going to be like, oh, come on, like, eye roll.
Right.
You just got, when you make a decision like that, it's going to go, like, you're going to have both reactions. So
100%.
Yeah.
The second thing it makes me think of is, like, the whole movie is about people's investment into preserving life. And, like, that's kind of what an honorable investment into war is, wherein, like, you are investing the possibility of sacrificing your own life for the greater good, so to speak, however that's defined. That's the ideal. And so, like, the fact that it goes from what we learn is Ryan's eyes into the eyes of the man who will then lead a group to save him is, here is the story of the people who are then behind the story of Ryan even living at all. Right. And so in that way, it's calling to the fact that, like, because the film is putting to task the audience member to think the same way. The fact that there are people within your own life that you've never met ever that have continued to preserve your own life in respect to stuff. And then in terms of, like, as Christians, like, you can't not think of Christ. And so, like, the idea of, like, going from my own eyes, transitioning to the life of Christ, and then realizing, oh, that entire life has been cost and paid in full to my own, like, life. That then is what it makes me think of. And then the third thing is, if that idea of, like, Edward Burns's character, Private Ryben, doing, like, his scene at the end, or bookending, I think that would be more compelling if the bookend was longer, and you had, like, moments of, like, maybe, like, if the movie really wasn't about the act of saving Ryan, but was more like flashbacks and then to the present moment, and then, like, it would be more about, like, these old men who are then reflecting on their lives very overtly in front of the camera, wherein maybe Ryan didn't, go on to cure cancer, but he actually got married, had an affair, ruined his life, and is trying to reconnect with his kids. And now Private Ryben's, like, dealing with the idea of, like, we spent all this time in the lives of other people to bring back a man who has made bad choices. Is that the right thing? That's a different movie.
It is, yeah.
And I kind of want to watch that movie now that I described it. But,
well,
like,
if you all it is that one little tweak at the end, right? And it makes it a totally different, like, thought. Like, it totally changes the whole way you see the movie if you just make that one little change at the end.
And it's not really a charge to the audience, which I think is what Spielberg wants to do. Like, Spielberg is making a charge to the audience that, like, have you earned the right to even be sitting in the theater comfortably with air conditioning?
Right. And I think he is. I think when Hank says, "Earn this" to Ryan as he's dying, I think that is Spielberg saying that to the audience in memory of these men that have died for the country. So at the end of the day, it is a wholly and fully, like, patriotic movie trying to honor veterans. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, you know, there's a degree to which like we do need to honor people that have fought in wars. Like it's not like I think that war is an awful thing, and I think there should never be wars, like obviously. But I don't think
Yeah.
anyone would disagree with that. Like, but they happen, and people die. And yeah, and this too, like it being World War II makes it a little bit easier. It's a little bit harder when you have like wars that seem a little less ethical.
Yeah,
But
Vietnam. Yeah.
this is a war that's really easy to get behind. Like, okay, we're
Yeah.
going to stop Hitler. Like everybody wants to stop Hitler, Um,
Yeah.
it's the classic like he's doing an actual war movie where the Nazis are the bad guys.
Yeah.
Instead of an Indiana Jones movie where you have the easy villain in the Nazis. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like if I have any like issue with the movie, I don't like love the bookends. I think they're like I do think like I don't know. Here's
They
the thing.
feel very different from the rest of the movie.
Yeah, they do. They feel very different. I don't think you need them necessarily. Or you need less. You need just less, a little less. And I don't particularly like the earn this like line. And here's why: because like the whole film, Spielberg is just doing an incredible job of like show don't tell. He like over and over again, he's doing show don't tell. Like I'm going to show you what these people are feeling, and so that you can empathize with it. I'm going to show you like these emotions instead of like telling you, hey, this is how you should feel. And then like you end the movie with like trying to like shove a like takeaway from the film like down my throat. And I'm like, I probably would have taken that away without you trying to shove it down my throat on my own, just by the experience that I just had. And so like when I've already had the experience with the movie that I've had, and then like now you're like trying to shove this like moral takeaway down my throat. Now like I'm going to like kind of step back and be like, whoa, like I'm going to be a little resistant to it. Whereas before I would have just like taken it and run with it. And so that is like one thing that I think personally didn't entirely work for me. And it even kind of feels like a jerk thing to say to a dude. Like,
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it feels like really like you've been such a like nice guy and a very like moral upstanding guy all through this movie, and then like you're like pulling this kid in and saying earn this. It's like that doesn't really make sense for the character either, to me.
That's interesting.
So
The show don't tell thing I think is true, because like Spielberg sets up these scenes where they're constantly bringing up the cost of human life.
Yeah.
Like, what is the cost of human life? So
yeah, and it's great.
The dialogue scene between in the church where Millard says like, I can make the decision to like to direct my soldiers to do something knowing that they may die, because if one dies, it's possible whatever they were doing might save 2, 3, 10 people. Yeah. And he's like, which is setting up the idea of like, but now people are dying for one guy, person. Yeah. And so like the math doesn't add up. And then they have a later scene where they meet like a pilot who crash lands, and it's because they crash land because he wasn't notified of the load of the plane. Yeah. So it ends up crashing, and the load was prepped because it was made to protect a general who had the like protective armor on the plane, and a car in the plane, which then caused them, when they crashed, for the car to like essentially sandwich every soldier in the back, like, and kill them all. So he's the only one who survives. And they pointedly say like, all that for one general. Like, how important can one general be? So someone in a position of power, and all those people die. And so there's a lot of stuff consistently like throughout that like sets this up, so that at the end we're getting, as the audience, like, okay, there's a lot of investment into one person.
Yes.
Is that worth it? But my emotional reaction and tears, which pour down my face throughout the film,
Yeah.
even to the end of like earn this, and then even the bookends at the end are so strong that
Yeah.
like, because I'm buying into the fact that now like Spielberg is making sure to hit home to the audience, which is not always as intelligent as people wish they were.
That's
I
true.
think
Yeah.
like he is trusting the audience to put up with a lot because the film is so brutal,
Mhm.
that then he's getting to this point of really just saying like, turn away from all the flashiness, turn away from the technicals of which we've earned our Oscars for, and just recognize like what I'm trying to say, which
Yeah.
is, you know, pulling the audience to Miller's face as Miller does with Ryan, and saying, earn this. And
Yeah.
so to me, like, I stepped away
And
with it
asking
feeling
yourself the
good.
question like the old man does, I guess, at the end, like,
Yeah, like, did I live a good life?
yeah,
Like, that's so
was I a good man?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I love it.
yeah. I love that you love it. And I think that a lot of people did and have loved that aspect of it. You know, we talked about a lot of the critics were talking about the mature use of like emotional manipulation, and that's probably like one of the major scenes they're talking about when they're saying that.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I feel like I don't love the earn this line. I just think it's like it feels weird for the character for me. And I feel like the bookend emphasizes that by dragging out his like wrestling a little bit too long, and like having the wife come up and him like asking her, because like what is she gonna say, like, you know, no, you're pretty blah life, like of course she's gonna be like, yeah, you lived a good life, like
Right.
who wouldn't, like what spouse wouldn't, you know, reassure you, even if like your life wasn't that great, like what spouse isn't gonna like reassure you that you like lived a good life, like
Yeah, and
I don't
like
know, it it just feels weird to me. Um, I just wish it could have been a little bit less. Like it could have been,
yes, totally.
it could have been like less dragged out. Um, yeah, and then I don't know, like it doesn't even end on that. It ends on like a waving American flag.
Yeah,
And
that's the
which
true
doesn't
bookend, which is
read,
really interesting.
it might have read well at the time, but now like the true bookend is the waving American flag. And I don't know, that just reads weird to me now. I'm like, but I'm also like not like the super patriot guy. So like
Mhm.
that just
Me too.
feels
Yeah.
weird to me. I'm like, yes, I love my country and I'm glad I was born in my country, but I'm like, I'm not like super patriot, you know, USA, America's the best country that ever was and ever will be.
It's like the music. Its
Yeah.
correlation has been co-opted
It
in
is.
such weird ways that, like, yeah,
The
that
American
feels
flag
like
feels
something.
weird. Yeah.
It
Now
does,
it
and
does.
which is annoying because, like, it's my flag too. You know, it's your
Yeah.
flag too.
Right.
So
Mhm.
it is bizarre that it feels that way. I think it's one of those things where, like, if the U.S. federal or state had like a similar to like Australia or New Zealand, like a film board where they
Mhm.
would like, hey, we'll give you some money, but you got to bookend the film with the American flag. Like,
Yeah.
then like I feel like it would be more sensible, but it does feel a little odd.
Yeah.
But as a
It's not a
film that's
big deal
also,
to me, but yeah.
yeah, it's not that distracting.
Yeah.
But yeah, the final thing, like, just to put to rest, like the book ending and the, you know, the wife coming up, like this movie isn't Stalker where it's like super slow paced and just constant conversation about
Sure.
philosophy, and so it doesn't earn this point where like a character who has barely been in the film
Mm-hmm.
can step in and then turn out to be deeply important. So like the wife in Stalker is really like the bookend of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's like borderline hysterical at the beginning of the film and weird, and that's like your first sign to be like, maybe this movie isn't for me. And then like by the time you persevere through the film and you get to the end, she ends it with this monologue directly to the viewer, as that film does several times, and like it ends up being so deeply important and so deeply valuable to better understanding the material. And so like this movie it's not an art house film. It's not like just doing weird things to do it, and if you buy into it, it makes it better. It's being much more conventional because Spielberg is so brilliant at doing so. So yeah, it does feel it really does come out of place, but I think like that's also because it's filmed differently from the rest of the film. It feels very different from the rest of the film. And then yeah, like looks are so important. We have connected with Private Ryan as Matt Damon, not Private Ryan as old man. So it requires some buying into.
Another thing, like this is kind of adjacent, we can kind of wrap that talk up about the bookends up, but like the Ryan character is like, I don't know, it's hard to even like him. So like he has the
he's
whole
barely in the movie.
He's barely in the movie, so like you don't get close to him. And then when you finally do meet him, he's like not as emotional as you feel like he should be about his brothers dying and his mom being alone now. And he's like, no, I'm staying. And then like he tells this like really immature punk kind of sounding story about like immature sexual story about his brothers. To to Miller, and you're like, oh, this is just a punk kid, and so like they don't set you up to make you feel like Ryan was really worth it, and then like in the end he's asking the question like, was I worth it? And you're like, well, I don't know, if you stayed like you were, like maybe not.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it's just that just even adds to that of like, I don't know. But like me, I'm like, even if somebody didn't live the best life, they're still worth saving. But there is like the moral question, we can get into that, is like, is like the sacrificing of potential sacrifice of 6 dudes worth this one kid's life? Or I don't know. It's a question that honestly I don't know how to answer, because like it's one of those questions that like you would at first thought you would think like, oh yeah, it's worth it. Like you don't want to go the utilitarianism like route of like doing the math to figure out the morals and figuring out like, do the means justify the ends? Like I am not like a utilitarianism like backer. Like I don't think that moral ethic is a good moral ethic. But that's what you would think at first glance, is like it's all about the math, but I don't think it is. Like it is a very like hard question to answer, and you put yourself in the shoes of those guys, and you're like, why are we going through all this trouble for one kid? We don't even know if he's alive, for one thing, and we're like putting our lives at risk to go save this one kid, instead of like putting our lives at risk for the actual war effort. And really, like, at the end of the day, they're not even like putting their lives at risk for the kid, but for the kid's mother, which I guess is more commendable in a way, because it's like the people back home that we're trying to save, and like, so there's a sense in which that makes it maybe a little bit more commendable if you view it through that way. But I don't know, it's a tough moral quandary that I don't know that there is an answer to, honestly.
And it doesn't pursue the dour approach of like All Quiet on the Western Front, where like it just completely buys into just like this meaninglessness of violence. And actually that one probably has more connection with the Malick film than anything, because the people are so covered in dirt, they're basically earth. But like, this one wants to converse about like the contrast of, it's right, but ...
Right.
Because yeah, even the beginning of the film starts that way with these generals just like talking, or whoever they are, just talking about like, does this make sense or not? And then a case is made about historical precedent. But
with the Lincoln letter that apparently is not exactly like it is in the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Not completely historically accurate, but compelling, I guess. Yeah. You know. All right, let's talk about some good stuff, some stuff we liked. I always like to talk about Spielberg distinctives, things that I've seen through like watching through his filmography that I think are like, when I see these, I'm like, oh, that's so Spielberg, you know? So some of the shots that I think he just does in every movie, he always makes sure there's a silhouette in his movies. There's like, I don't think I've seen one movie of his where there wasn't a silhouette at some point. And low angle shots. So like a shot of a person from a low angle, like he loves those shots, and there's always those in his movies. And then like also like he loves to do a push in to an extreme close up. You know, you get that at the very beginning of the film, going into the old Ryan's eyes. Like he loves those shots. And then like dude knows how to throw in a wide shot transition to give you context. Like he does that so many times in this movie, and you kind of get a context for where you are and you know what to expect, you know. Or even like I think too of like a wide shot to kind of throw you off a little bit. You know, there's the wide shot of them walking through the flower field just before they find Private Ryan, and it gives you a kind of like a serene, more like you feel safer because they're walking through a flower field, but then it's like the tank comes. So it's even like using wide shots to kind of like set you up with the wrong feeling for the moment. So just very good. And like I think something that this movie shows that like he might not have even done as well as he does here since the Indiana Jones movies is just like having an incredible sense of space and geography for action sequences where the audience doesn't feel lost like in the middle of it all. And even like the chaos of the D-Day sequence, like you still are able to like track where you are and where you're going, even somehow in the midst of all the chaos, which is just incredibly impressive. Something that Spielberg just does so well. All through that last battle sequence, like I kept thinking like, it's so incredible that I kind of can keep track of where everyone is and what buildings they're in. And like knowing like, oh, Upham's diving down here, and like up behind him, oh, that's the bell tower where Jackson is doing his sniping, and oh, over here is the building where, you know, Mellish is, you know. I don't know. I'm just like, this dude,
it's impressive,
knows how to like keep the audience on track with the geography of a sequence. It's incredible, honestly.
I often describe it as if you can like draw a map of a setting in a movie, especially a complicated one, then you should thank the like pre-production and the editing, like because it is Ramel doesn't exist and I could draw it, like I could draw all those sections, and
or
like,
at least get pretty close, you know.
It would
He and like similarly, the dude knows how to block a shot like nobody's business.
Oh my gosh.
And then of course the tension building, I love that. Let's talk about let's just kind of talk about some intriguing scenes or images that we liked. We've kind of hit on a lot of these. Maybe something that maybe we haven't talked about yet, that you just found very like intriguing, maybe in the visuals or even just in the way the scene plays out. Do you have any more that we haven't hit on that stand out?
I did like how when the information of the Ryan brothers dying is shared with the mother,
Yeah.
that you can see a photo of the four brothers on the table, but there's
Yeah.
an American flag covering the face of the fourth one, and so I thought that was clever.
I didn't notice that. That's
Very
great. Yeah.
yeah, it's very good, like movie logic stuff
Yeah.
to do that. And I think Spielberg does well to like understand not to do too much of that, but just enough to keep like,
Right.
engaging and interesting. So that was interesting. I like that. I thought it was really, I thought Hanks's moment when Captain Miller, it's after, when is it? Is it after Steamboat Willie gets away that he, like takes a moment to like settle down, and he like goes privately, and then he just starts weeping.
He breaks down right there.
The way he breaks down is so good in terms of like a man who is trying not to, who is continually putting off that that particular emotional expression.
Yeah.
And like
for the sake of the team,
the team, or even his own sensibilities.
Yeah.
From like the type of crying he has, the way he like covers his face, the way he looks to see that no one's coming. Like I found that all just really powerful, especially as like someone who has cried that way before sometimes. So like it's just really like it's just a good moment to take place. And it's like during a time where like we've already understood that Miller is like a vigilant, observant individual who takes, like, part of why he's the leader he is because he understands when to do and when not to do. And here's a moment where his body has taken over his body and decided, no, you have to do this right now. And so I found that very I thought that was a great moment.
And that's actually in between, I think, when the medic Wade dies and before he lets the German go.
Yes, you're correct. Because I think that they go back, and that's when Upham is smoking with him.
Yeah.
And then I think that just the action here is just so good in terms of being like tactile, especially now in the year of our Lord 2024, where movies become less and less tactile.
Yeah.
And I'm almost positive that's why the Terrifier movies are so popular right now, is because it's just practical effects of awful violence that makes you react. And I think like the fact that this movie is so visceral is so like part of why it's so good. And to then bring up Band of Brothers again, I always remember there's that one scene, I think it's when they're at Bastogne, is that what it's called? It's like snowing and they're in the forest.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And the one guy gets shot not like straight through his chest to his back, but from his left arm through his like torso out his right arm, and like you just feel it when you see that happen. You're like, oh, that is the worst way to get shot. And like I just appreciate when movies or storytelling or films or whatever just have tactile violence, because violence ought to be shocking and uncomfortable and tactile. And so yeah, those details to me are nice. I liked all that stuff.
Yeah. Another thing, one more thing that I thought of as you were talking was probably my favorite line in the movie is after Miller has that breakdown, where he says, I think I wrote it down. Every man I kill, the farther away from home I feel. And I was like, man, what a great line. Like,
so good.
To just
super
emphasize like the value of human life, and how like taking human life, even in the context of war, is like ripping pieces of your humanity off. Like, even knowing like this, as far as like anyone can tell, this is a just war. Like we're doing this for the good of the world, of the entire world, actually, as far as we can tell, this is a good moral thing that we're trying to do. But even in that context, like taking another human life is like soul ripping. And I thought that was probably my favorite like line in the movie for sure. But yeah, I do think it would be we can dig into a little bit more that idea of like experiencing war and violence in films. Um, because I do think like there's so many like fine lines with that, of like when is it, when are you crossing the line, and when is it just like having too much fun with it, and when is it like important to like feel the the horror of it, you know? I think, and I think too, like it's very subjective, as well for each person. Each person kind of has to like know for themselves where those lines are for them.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I did write down a few quotes from Spielberg about kind of like some of his objectives with having the audience experience war on this level. One of them, about the opening scene, he said, quote, "Here I wanted to bring the audience onto the stage with me and demand them to be participants with those kids who had never seen combat before in real life, and we get to the top of Omaha Beach together," unquote. And I think that's important to think about, is that like Spielberg has been like doing all this research, and inevitably in his research he finds out like a lot of these are like kids, for one thing.
Yes.
You know, pe- they're men that today we would call kids. Like they're
Mhm.
17, they're 18, like they're kids. Um, and two, like none of them knew what was about to happen. Like they're heading onto this beach. They don't know that they're getting what they're getting into, because they all thought like, oh, the bombers have like taken out most of the Germans. We're just going to land on the beach and, figure out what our objective is next, but the bombs dropped like were not done correctly or something like that. I don't
Yeah.
remember the
Mhm.
exact history of it, but like they missed their marks basically. And so like they didn't take out all the Germans that were there. And so they were basically just like walking into a slaughterhouse. Like,
Yeah.
Ambrose talked about how like some of those boats, like nobody made it out of the boat. Not nobody even made it stepped off of the boat. They
Mhm.
just got all mowed down. So I do think there is some merit in like just like a filmmaker taking the swing of, I am going to like, I want my audience to see how terrible this was, um, and to experience that, and for not just like for the sake of that, but because like it's important to realize like what men that are in war go through, and it's not just all like valor and heroism. It's
Yeah.
like it's like landing on a beach, not knowing what in the world you're getting into, being confused, being scared, and trying to just survive.
Yeah.
uh, and yeah, it's really great. Another quote that I think is very telling is Spielberg said, quote, "I think Vietnam pushed people from my generation to tell the truth about war without glorifying it," unquote.
That's good.
And I thought that was good. And I think it's an example of, like I was talking about earlier, wars that like we feel like were justly taken, like that justly happened, to a certain degree, and then wars possibly like maybe Vietnam that maybe were unjustly involved with, like, um and it's all very like there's a lot to it. There's a lot of nuance to all of that stuff, I realize. But I think Spielberg here is just kind of saying, hey, this war in Vietnam, like in hindsight, like bad idea. And so we need to maybe be a little bit more blunt about what war really is, instead of
Mhm.
like pretending that it's just like all valor and glory and heroism.
Mhm.
There's there's brutality to it. There's evil in it. You know, it's not something to be just played around with. It's not something to just like say we're gonna do this war like because it's there. It's like, no, this is not
This is
a
the
toy.
worst thing.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
the worst thing. But yeah, and he did say in one of the interviews that, hey, war is hell, and like nobody needs to learn that lesson. And so which was interesting to
Yeah.
hear, because he's kind of saying like, that's not why I made this. I didn't make this movie to show people that war is hell, because everybody already knows that. And so he really says one of the things he talked about several times was the theme of like trying to show these particular characters trying to find decency in the midst of that hell, which I thought is interesting to think about. I guess there are like just everyday life parallels, because life in general can feel like hell sometimes, depending on circumstances, and trying to find decency within that is an interesting thought. But I don't know. Did you have any thoughts about like anything else that was explored in the film? Or there's a lot to all of that. War is a very sticky subject, especially because it's like, I don't want to dishonor. I want to be able to talk about war and like the way I feel about it as a concept without like dishonoring men that have like served and died in wars, because I think those are separate things. I don't think just soldiers that have died in war are bad because they took part in the war, obviously. And so it's hard to talk about because of that, I think.
Yeah, I think the movie kind of does a good job of understanding and displaying to the audience a mixture of like how of the responsibility that's given to you out of like a chain of command, one's own involvement in how they're responsible for those decisions and also not responsible for those decisions. And then also kind of coming down to like the results of said decisions. Because a lot of the moral quandaries are sometimes debates amongst characters about what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah.
And then whether or not that will come down to your like consequence, or it's a consequence of just following the order.
Right.
And like if the order is sound or sensible, then you're capable of at the very least leaning on something. But if not, then or at the very least if you personally do not adhere to it, like that's when like a lot of the conflict starts to come out. I mean, Caparzo dies because he doesn't listen to the order of like, no, we don't take kids. Like we're in an active, we're not just in a warfare right now, but we're in an active battle skirmish. This moment, you cannot take that child. And like so there's a lot of like moments of the film that push those details onto display. And I think what Spielberg does, by instead of just saying, war is hell, which he doesn't really do,
right,
what he does is he shows the dynamics of how war completely disrupts the functions of human relationships and ultimately kills it at times. Obviously, again, all these things are expounded upon in Band of Brothers further, but like they are fully on display here. And the parts are coming together with a really great whole. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, I really like that. That's good. I did want to end with a final thought. And it was sparked by something that Spielberg's dad, Arnold Spielberg, said in one of the making of pieces. He says essentially that the more you talk about the horrors of war, the less likely you are to get involved in another. And my question as a final thought is, has history shown us that this is not true? Because I feel like history has shown us that like it is not necessarily true that being aware of the horrors of war prevents you from getting into more, because what keeps happening is you just
Mhm.
keep getting into more and more wars.
Yeah, humanity has had more time in war than time not in war.
Yeah.
So,
And so, yeah, everyone knows war is hell, and yet it still is happening. So I don't know. It makes you wonder too about like, okay, like what is the point of war movies then? If it's not going to deter war by raising awareness of how awful war is, then what is the point of a war movie? And I think that's something that maybe Spielberg does do well in this movie. If he really was saying, I'm not trying to say war's hell with this movie because everyone already knows it is. I'm more exploring these human elements and these moral questions and quandaries. Then that's almost like even bigger props to Spielberg,
Hmm.
because they did have his dad saying that in the making of Doc, but that wasn't from Spielberg. That was from his dad. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things that's like, okay, if being more aware of war doesn't necessarily prevent war, then what is the point of a war movie? I think that's an important question, like for filmmakers to ask when they're making a war movie. Like, what is why am I making this? And is it going to do more harm than good? Or, I think that's an important question to ask you know, when making this movie, or even like people can get really obsessed with the history of war. And it is
Mhm.
fascinating. But I think it is an important question to ask too, like, why am I so fascinated with this?
Mhm.
What am I taking away from this? But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Arnold Spielberg's like quote
Hmm.
is definitely a part of the film, but it's not what the film is about. And
Yeah.
that's very clear. Like
Hmm.
Spielberg obviously saying like I'm not making an war is hell movie. Um, I think what Spielberg is then doing with the film is using the history, his fictionalized, you know,
Version of
version
it.
of the
Yeah.
history, to then say something about what, by the reality of war, what war has, and
Hmm.
in some cases that is when honorable, when people put their lives on the line, what is that cost, and like turning it, earn it, like
Yeah.
turning it to the audience saying, are you worth it, and
Hmm.
like what are you doing to make it worth it. And so in that regard, like I think on this film alone, like it's not probably what, if Arnold Spielberg, as the father watching the film being made,
Yeah.
is hoping. Like, I don't think the film goes that direction.
Sure.
I mean, I think if anything, that would be what, like, All Quiet on the Western Front actually is.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
that's existed for longer than Saving Private Ryan, and
Hmm.
there's been wars since
Yeah.
then. So, and that's about World War One,
Hmm.
so not even
Hmm.
two. Um, so yeah, I in response to your like main kind of observation of like war films, the ethic of it, and possibly preventing war, I think it really just comes down to maybe a misunderstanding of like the desperate sickness of the human heart, and the
Sure.
fact that like because of greed and pride and jealousies and lust, wars happen.
Hmm.
I mean, just the fact that like it's coming to mind that like pride and greed obviously start wars, but then you have like Absalom having this hatred for his father David in the Old Testament because of the rape of Tamar, and the fact that David doesn't respond to it appropriately. So now
Hmm.
lust has caused war. and
Yeah.
so and so there is so much more to it, and I
Yeah.
think it showcases the um like two things. One, that there's a lot of power that God has permitted man to have. And then two, that power has the effect of causing war.
Sure.
Going from maybe a particular intimate desire that one person has that then can spiral and develop into so much
Yeah.
more damaging material. I mean, obviously, you know, like World War I with Franz Ferdinand, and so like, yeah, it's an interesting thought to have, because I do think like maybe one would be reticent to like, oh, I want to still be greedy, but I want to try not to cause a war, so I'll just be greedy with no war ethic in mind.
Yeah.
But like, you can't prevent that, because sin is
Yeah.
a lack of control of the self, and then when you sin, you cause a lack of control of beyond yourself. So
Yeah.
you can spiral into war.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought,
And
but I think it's a little naive.
and this isn't something that this film really explores at all, but like
Mhm.
just to the idea that like our flaws seep into the systems, and the wars eventually like sprawl out of like the flaws in those systems, and the flaws in the way that our system conflicts with someone else's system, you know. When our way of life conflicts with someone else's way of life, and how like it all like, it's like a bottom up kind of problem in a way. But yeah, that's not really exploring this. But yeah, I guess like the question, I just had that question because like I feel like in the past I've always felt like, oh, the best way to do war movies is to like really make people feel like war is hell, because you know that's how we should feel about war. And I think there is still merit to that. Like I think even like the most recent version of All Quiet on the Western Front was like really well made and like kind of gets that point across. But like
Gnarly movie.
yeah. But like I think too, like that maybe that shouldn't be ultimately be the goal of a war movie, because it doesn't really work. So like maybe we should be doing other things with these movies. I don't know, just kind of a challenge I was thinking about because of the way I've thought about war movies in the past. But yeah, the other question we should close with is this the greatest modern war movie? I think like objectively probably so. I don't think it would be my favorite necessarily, but I think I would still consider this a modern movie, even though it's
98, that's modern.
How old would that be now? Like 26 years old. So still a modern movie, I would say, in movie history. And yeah, I don't know. I have I think I like The Thin Red Line more just as a movie, but objectively, yeah, this probably is the greatest. Like taking my personal preference out of it as much as I can. Yeah. I don't know. Can you think of anything else like that that you would say like tops this as far as like a great war movie that like is revered by culture? And yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I can't think of one.
Sticking to just movies, because in terms of like war narrative on film, I think Band of Brothers is like just can't go without mentioning it again. But just it is world leagues ahead of even this. But I do think the latest All Quiet film does come close. There is one moment in that film that has just such bad editing that I really can't stand towards the end of the film. But otherwise, the material itself, I think, reaches that category. And I think it's more art housey than people probably expected it to be.
Yes.
I mentioned The Dirt, but like what I found so, like when it was nominated for everything, including like, makeup and costumes and stuff, I was like, well, I can't remember if it won, but I felt like it was going to win, just because I was like, these people are covered in dirt, and like there is no way this film is not evoking the imagery of like, from dust you came and dust you return.
Right.
And like these men are turning into the dirt, being suffocated into the dirt, killed by. So like all of the art housey kind of bizarre violence of the film, I think, was definitely up there.
Yeah.
So that one is close. There are some other admirable attempts. Like I know there's like Saints and Soldiers, and then I know there's also a documentary called Restrepo that is supposed to be just like and it's a modern documentary about like I think either Desert Storm or at the very least like mid 2000s. And it's this really like I listened to an interview about it, and I've been meaning to watch it soon, but the interview talks about like how it's this really fascinating depiction of these military men, not depiction, it's just actual footage, who are defending like a post from like borderline daily attacks, and how like most of the men miss it, and like why. And it explores that like there's an honesty, there is a breaking down of like ego that took place, that like they all felt so much more of an intimacy amongst their connections and how they cared for one another and how they sacrificed for one another, that like it became complicated for them as a moment in their life. And in that way I think that itself could perhaps in a different genre combat the quality of Saving Private Ryan. But I think you're right. Like
it's hard to compare a documentary though to fiction
because it's such a different way of engaging material. And you know, it's nonfiction, but like here, like it is quintessential. Like if you're someone who wants to engage like war films as a way of like I would almost say like the healthiest way is poetry to understand it. Like Saving Private Ryan is peak.
That's why Thin Red Line I think is so good. Because that's
that goes full poetry.
That's Malick's like main mode of speaking is poet, like visual poetry. So,
borderline prayer. Just the whole film.
The only other one I can think. So I think Thin Red Line is up there for me as far as like modern war movies, and then Dunkirk I think is like an incredible film. It doesn't like, it's not quite as brutal as Saving Private Ryan is. It's a little cleaner as far as that goes. But was it rated PG-13?
I'm can't remember. Yes. I'll find out.
It's PG-13, so it's nowhere near as like violently brutal, but still a very like disconcerting film in many ways because of the way that Nolan uses tension. And I would probably put those three up there as like as far as modern war movies. I did really enjoy Hacksaw Ridge.
That was okay. That was a good one.
I'm not like the hugest fan of 1917. I thought it was like a good movie, not great.
It was fun in theaters, and it was a roller coaster ride. That was kind of it.
Felt a bit gimmicky to me. So, but yeah, I would probably put my three like modern war movies that I would be like, these are the three would probably be this movie, Saving Private Ryan, alongside The Thin Red Line and Dunkirk, I would say. But yeah, there's also probably plenty that I haven't seen. So maybe you're listening and you're like, no, this one too, or please, you can email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com and let me know. So feel free to do that. But yeah, the very, very last thing about this movie is I think this is probably like Spielberg's last iconic movie. Like he has really great movies after this, but like I'm not sure that he makes necessarily another, like this was an iconic movie for him and in many ways. And I don't know, I'm struggling to think of like a film since this one that like you could say is iconic for him. That like has kind of stuck as like a Spielberg, like, you know, Mount Rushmore sort of, that you can make an argument like, oh, this should be on his Mount Rushmore.
I get you.
But yeah, I think The Fabelmans is really, really good and underseen and underrated. Maybe not underrated by those who've seen it, but maybe just underseen. But yeah, I don't know. he has great ones. Like I've the run that he goes on after this of AI, Minority Report, Catch Me If You Can, like 3 really great movies, but none of them necessarily like iconic of like this belongs on this. This might belong on the Spielberg like Mount Rushmore, you know.
It's interesting because Catch Me If You Can is like based on popularity on Letterboxd is
It
his
is
number one
interesting
listed
that
movie,
it is, but
and then Jurassic Park's behind it, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Because I didn't even know he did Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
So like that's how like
that popularity thing changes like month to month though on Letterboxd, so it's just kind of
it
like
does.
it
That's
might just
100%
be
true.
sometimes that's just based on like what's on Netflix, you know.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
I do know there were some people who just absolutely adored his West Side Story.
I did enjoy it. I liked it more than the original, to be honest.
And even Tintin, I know people just like
haven't seen it. So.
Exploded with joy over Tintin, but otherwise, like
but like iconic, like
right. There hasn't
great and
seemed to
iconic
be
is different,
that,
you know.
Right, exactly. Nothing has quite captured like, you know, Raiders, E.T.,
right.
Jurassic Park, Schindler's
Jaws,
List,
Raiders,
Jaws,
E.T.
Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
If anything, like Ready Player One's iconic for being like embarrassing. Like it's like the opposite. And even Close Encounters, which is like less seen, is still like considered iconic for many.
Yeah.
And I mean, a hot take. I didn't even like that one. So like,
that is a hot take. I do like that movie.
So like, it's it's super. I don't know what his next like big one would be. War Horse isn't it? That's not. Nope. No way.
Yeah. But just an interesting thought. Like this might be his last iconic movie. I think The Fabelmans should be probably considered in that. I think it's a really, really great film that like is so like uniquely Spielberg, and not just like the way it's made, but obviously like the subject matter. It's like basically a quasi autobiography. But yeah, I don't know. For me, this is like this probably is a hot take, but this movie in like my rankings, I have like just outside of the top 10. So that probably is a hot take. Most people would probably say like, oh, Saving Private Ryan should be in the top 10 Spielberg movies. Maybe even like in the top 5, maybe. But yeah, not for me. It's like just outside of the top 10. So I don't know. But I have like, I'm a Letterboxd list junkie. I don't know if you are or not, but
at the very least I do the yearlies, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, I don't know. Where would you put this? Would you probably make this in your top Spielberg movies?
Oh, definitely. I think it captures, I think, what like I would want from a Spielberg movie that's like a quote unquote adult version of what he does.
Yeah.
And it feels like a Spielberg movie too. I think that's important as well, because
it does.
He has his staples. You talk about some of them, and I'm always just fascinated by how he's comfortable directing various characters to just talk over each other, and you can just keep up. I mean, as far back as Jaws, like everyone talks over each other in Jaws. He finds a way to go into like a different type of film that is far more serious than his material usually had been, and it comes out great, and it feels like his movie, and so I think it's absolutely up there with me.
Yeah.
There's still a fair amount of blind spots of his that I haven't seen.
Yep. I'm working through mine.
Honestly, yeah. And so like there are definitely like probably attempts for other ones to like supersede it. But yeah, like it's up there. It's great.
Yeah, I've had some blind spots that I've filled in that like I really, really like. You know, like I gave Private Ryan like a solid, I mean, really good, really great movie, like 4 stars, 8 out of 10. But yeah, I have a big tier of like Spielberg for me, like basically like the top half of his filmography is 8 out of 10, or higher. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
he knows what he's doing. Yeah.
it's hard to find like a bad. It's hard to find a really bad Spielberg movie. They're out there. I've watched them, but they're hard to find. Yeah, I have down at number 36 in my rankings at the very bottom, a movie that might also deal with this war in a way. Whatever. Well, I'm not going to mention its name again.
Voldemort of Spielberg films.
But yeah, that's really like, I mean, we could probably go on for another hour, but we're not going to on this movie. But yeah, Melvin, why don't you share quickly where people can follow you? They're interested in what you're doing with Cinematic Doctrine. How can they find? What's the best place for them to follow you, I guess?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for inviting me back on. This was a lot of fun. Saving Private Ryan was just really fun to revisit, and it was about time I got back to it anyway. Yeah, so Cinematic Doctrine's on pretty much every podcast app. Spotify, I don't think it's even called iTunes anymore. Apple Podcasts, I think is what it's called. And just pretty much everything else that you can find under the sun. I'm probably on it. Yeah, and if you're a fan of movie discussions, you're going to enjoy it. If you're a fan of comedic from beginning to end discussions, you're going to enjoy the party pleasers. And then if you're a fan of just general topical stuff, check out those Let's Talk episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're on Instagram, so you can check out some stuff there. You'll get good teasers for a couple episodes that have gone up, just reminders that they exist.
Yeah.
And then you can go to Threads, and we're also on there too, Cinematic Doctrine as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's where I see you the most is it's on Threads and Instagram. So those are probably
I think there's
the good
TikTok
places.
too. Yeah, there definitely is, but it's mostly just the same reels that are posted on.
I'll make sure to link all that stuff in the episode description too. So, cool. But yeah, next week Melvin is joining me again. We're gonna, since it's the beginning of the year, it's not now as we're recording this, but well, you're listening, it will be. We're gonna talk about we're gonna give a top 5 each. We're each gonna give our own top 5 inspirational movies to start the year. So we're trying to give you guys some extra oomph to hopefully get those resolutions going, get inspired to start off 2025. We're all going to need some inspiration to start off next year, I think. I have a strange feeling.
Need inspiration tomorrow morning.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, and then the week after that, obviously we'll keep going with Spielberg with AI. I already recorded that episode. It's a good episode. So
nice.
Yeah. So yeah, join us next week again for top 5 inspirational movies. And until then, I've been Eli Price for Melvin Benson. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We'll see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.